Got your own mic.
Is it working?
You got to get it right up to your mouth.
Oh, there we go. I do have a couple of questions. At the beginning, when Doug was providing his opening comments, he talked about that BOEM was going to be responsive to the comments in the public register and making those available. And I think, unless I misunderstood that, that's kind of a misunderstanding of what people have been asking for. And that is that we would see the response to the public comments in the Federal Register, similar to what National Marine Fisheries Service does, because Federal Register comments are always made available. So what we were looking for from the industry was a response from BOEM to public comments in the way that National Marine Fisheries Service does. And so is that something, Doug, that BOEM can accommodate?
Oh, sorry about the misunderstanding on my part then, Heather. I will just say that, typically we would not respond to comments and post that in the Federal Register, but it's something that BOEM can, take into consideration. In team, I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe it's something that, if we do the response to comments, maybe it's something that we could publish on our website and make it public, but maybe not go through the Federal Register. I think that, one of the things we've said all along, Heather, is that we need to show our work, and, we intend to do that as we move forward with the process. I just don't know about the formal Federal Register responding to the comments, but that's something that we can consider moving forward.
Thanks. And my second question is around, once you receive all the information up until June 28th, after talking and looking at the data for the fisheries that my boats participate in and talking with others between commercial and recreational, there really isn't any part of the call areas that have not been fished at some point, over the last, let's say, 20 years. How do you then decide what's the priority? I mean, there was a list of parameters, but there wasn't anything about what takes priority. So if fishing occurs in every part of the call areas, you will be displacing some type of fishing if you move forward. How do you decide how to do that?
Another great question, Heather. And I'll say that, that's one of the things that we've heard, and we're, evaluating how we can do that, because you're right. We are striving to be consistent and transparent. So we want to, like I said on the previous answer, is, show our work. So we're going to have to explain, what data we had, how we took that data into consideration, and how we developed those wind energy areas. And we're working as a team here in the Pacific, as a bureau, really, to make sure that we're coming up with a consistent way that we're showing that. And I'll just say, Heather, we've heard you, we're taking it into consideration. And I'm not sure how exactly it's going to look, but we will have something by the time we get to wind energy area designation.
Is that it, Heather? Okay. So folks in the room, representative, I'm going to come back there and give you the mic, even though I know it's so dangerous to give.
Thank you so much. David Gomberg, State Representative. Much of our discussion today has been about process, and I wanted to look a little further down the road. And my question is this: should this process come to a conclusion and we place wind farms in Southern Oregon, very close to the California border, where will that energy go?
I'll take that one too. Thanks for that, Representative Gomberg. I will just say, BOEM makes the areas available. We're a long way from, leasing areas, and even farther away from, what kind of project that's going to be proposed in those areas and where the landing for that energy is going to go. I can say that generally speaking that, energy that ties into the grid goes into the grid. Am I can I say that all that power that's generated, if it's tied into Southern Oregon, is going to go to all Oregon and not go to California? I can't. But I am not a transmission expert. And without having a project that's proposed, it's hard to say where exactly that power is going to go once if a project were to move forward.
Hey, Doug, you were breaking up in that, like the last 30 seconds or so of what you were saying.
Oh,
Can you say that again?
well, that's where all my brilliance came in. Sorry that I'll probably never be able to recreate that. I will just say, I'll conclude by saying that, we really won't know where the power is going to go until a project is proposed. And even then, the grid is interconnected, and it could go into Oregon and it could go into California. I just don't know. And, that would be something that, the transmission experts onshore would be the ones who would be able to determine that.
All right. Other questions in the room? And do remember to state your name, and if you have an affiliation, that would be great.
Dave Wright. I'm a public member, retired from the seafood industry. My first question is, when you were talking about the environment, you're talking about reasonable. For instance, is it birds, endangered birds, or is it whales or whatever? But is there a parameter? I mean, you say reasonable on potential damage. So nothing is spelled out. And then when you said the environmental impact, I was a little bit wondering, is there a parameter that you're going to be setting, or is it somebody that's going to be dictating the parameters? That's my first question. My second one is wind energy is it's a sign of the times to create more energy, and we all get that. My question though is you put wind farms on the ocean, and all of a sudden new technology comes out, and maybe it's not as efficient, or maybe the offshore then becomes a little too expensive. It doesn't work. So then if you have these infrastructures, or should we call them monstrosities, on the ocean, who is going to pull them off the ocean if they're not being used? And is a bond going to be set up so that the companies just can't walk away and create bankruptcy or something like that? So what safeguards is the public going to have from a situation like that? Is that going to be spelled out? Anyway, just two small little questions.
All right, who can address those questions?
I will address the second one first, and then I'll probably hand it over to I'll hand it over to someone else to answer the environmental question. For the first question, I will say that, the Bureau has a lot of experience in offshore energy, and we have lessons learned. And, I can say that we have a robust financial assurance program in place. At the end of the day, you're right. No one, we don't want federal taxpayers to be responsible for removing these. So we will have some sort of funding mechanism in place, some sort of financial assurance, so that if a company were to go bankrupt into the future, that there would be funds there that would be available to remove them off the ocean. Because at the end of the day, we offer leases and we have potential projects, but once the lease is done and the projects are over, we want the OCS to be returned to the condition that it was prior to the lease. So we have learned our lessons. We do have a pretty robust program in place, and that we will ensure that nothing is going to be left out there if a company were to go bankrupt or anything in the future. And I'll turn it over for the second answer on the environmental side.
I'll take the environmental question. My name is Donna Schrader, and I work as a marine ecologist in the Office of Environment in the Pacific region of BOEM. And I have a special emphasis in fish and fisheries. And so just to repeat what the original question was, is like, how do you determine environmental impacts, and are there certain constraints? And the answer is yes, there are. There's a number of constraints, and it's all rooted in the environmental laws that we have. And the first overall law that gives BOEM its regulatory authority is the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, or we call it the OCS Lands Act. And in that law, it requires BOEM to take in consideration environmental factors when you're citing an area for energy development, and in monitoring, and to understand the ongoing impacts, if any, of any action that our agency might take. And we are unique in an agency in that we actually have funded an environmental studies program that really helps our agency do the applied science to help us make informed decision making. So it is basically embedded in the DNA of our agency to consider environmental issues. Then, like all federal agencies, we are required to comply with a number of environmental acts, including the Magnuson-Stevenson Fishery Conservation and Management Act, where we get the essential fish habitat consultations that we have with NOAA Fisheries. We also have the Endangered Species Act, which we consult with both NOAA and the Fish and Wildlife Service to try to understand other impacts for listed species. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is where we do our consultations for seabirds, which I'm calling out because you specifically mentioned that that particular sensitivity of seabirds to offshore wind. And then also, again, as all agencies, we have the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires a very in-depth analysis of any federal action that has potential environmental impacts, and so that decision makers can incorporate that information in their decision making. And that has a number of, it's very process oriented. So it requires us to consider a no action alternative, and also other alternatives to meet the purpose of the federal action. So, and also it requires us to do outreach to the public, so we can develop alternatives with public input, and also to get information about the issues the public is concerned about, and even to receive information if the public wishes to contribute to that. And so the constraints then are through environmental laws and OXLA, NEPA, ESA, and Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Act. And they have certain criterion limits depending on what specific thing that we are addressing. And if you have, because we're talking with our fishing stakeholders in particular, I want to call out the essential fish habitat, which we do consult with NOAA Fisheries, and we meet with them on a regular basis. We even have, they've formed a special offshore wind group that we have frequent discussions about it. And so if there are particular things that you have further details, we'd be happy to talk about those, or any special concerns. Now's the time to say those, and we'd be happy to discuss those with you.
Well, thank you on that. And then my, I guess a follow-up on that is how are you going to monitor? It's going to be offshore. You're talking a pristine area in the world, not just the Oregon coast. And in doing that, there's going to be things that come up that we're not even aware of now, or that you're not aware of now, because this is a new area on the planet where you're looking at. So how are you going to monitor it when it's offshore? And then if the criteria isn't met with that kind of money that's going into this, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, are you really going to put some teeth to it? So that's my question.
Well, those are all good questions, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. So the first aspect of your questions was about monitoring. And we have a number of different ways that we monitor the environment. And as I mentioned before, the OCS Lands Act requires BOEM and our sister agency, BESI, to do ongoing monitoring so that we can better understand any kinds of environmental impact that are going on. And not only will we do monitoring, we will require, once we get a project submission, that any potential lessee have certain monitoring requirements contained within their construction and operations plan, which we often call the COP. We can't specify those right now because we haven't seen the details of the proposed project, but we do require monitoring at that time. And then BOEM, we do our own monitoring as well, more on a regional basis, but we also partner with our other federal and state agencies to understand ongoing monitoring. And we have done that in the past. In fact, one of our flagship environmental studies is called the Marine Multi-Agency Rocky Intertidal Network Monitoring Program, which we developed in the 80s, basically to try to understand what the potential impact would be from oil spills. And now that monitoring is one of the flagship monitoring programs in the world for long-term data sets. And we have sites from Alaska all the way down to Baja California, and it's a multi-agency partnership. So we are working with our federal agencies, and particular NOAA Fisheries. I want to emphasize that because of our stakeholder group today. And NOAA has some ongoing monitoring programs as well that we will build upon. In specific, their integrated ecosystem assessment program that we think would be very valuable. Because as you know, ocean conditions are changing and shifting. And so we have this term called a sliding baseline, so that we will be looking at, this instance, what's going on, but also making predictions in the future. If the ocean and atmospheric conditions are changing, we want to be able to be responsive to that. And so as far as, I'm going to call it, one of your concerns, we often term it like a threshold. Are there certain thresholds that might be triggered that would cause a federal action? And those are usually determined in our Endangered Species Act consultations. And so they have this term called jeopardy and so forth. So there are these mechanisms that are in place that BOEM will comply with because we do comply with all the environmental laws. And it's not just BOEM making these decisions. We partner with other federal agencies and we receive information from the state about their concerns. And we developed a program that's not just a one-time thing. There are many steps through the process that we do some monitoring. And we have demonstrated that in the past with the oil and gas program. So, so if you have specific things that you're interested in or comments, now's the time that we would like to receive those as well. So I think I addressed all your aspects of your question, but if I've left something out, please remind me what aspect that you were you're interested in.
Thanks, Donna. Heather, you raised your hand, and then we've got another person who wanted to speak here in the audience. So Heather, go ahead.
It's really just a follow up to that. And thanks for that description. Could you talk a little bit more to put it into perspective? We've shut down Dungeness crab fisheries early or not had them at all because of interactions with certain whales.
Mm-hmm.
So if a whale is entangled on one of the tethers, many hundreds of tethers that'll be necessary to anchor floating offshore wind platforms, does that shut down what's happening? Are we treated the same way? I don't think we are. So how do you reconcile those things so that fishermen understand that BOEM is taking the actions of offshore wind as seriously as NOAA and NIMS take the action of fishing applies to endangered species?
That's a very good question. And I would like to assure you that we are already have at least 2 different studies looking at the whale entanglement potential for projects. As I said, we don't have a specific project proposed, so we kind of develop different scenarios. And one difference between like entanglement issues from fishing gear versus potential entanglement with offshore wind is that the mooring system is really important in understanding entanglement risk. And so we don't permit any entanglement. And so we have to look at things on a risk basis. And so these characteristics of the tethering aspects of a project, there are a number of different ways, from tension leg or catenary or a variety of other things that might be characteristic for floating wind. And as you know, this is a kind of a frontier technology. And so the industry is working on different aspects, and this entanglement issue is on their minds. And so the cables tend to be thicker, and they are more difficult to entangle with than, say, a loose float line, which is usually what the characteristics of the crab trap is going to be. So there's quite a bit difference between the wind technology and the crab fishing, but we are also working and we're partnering with NOAA Fisheries, who is the lead agency, not only in understanding entanglement issues, but also, as I mentioned, the ESA consultation. And this is a major part of our discussions with NOAA Fisheries to try to understand and minimize any potential impact. And NOAA would be the ultimate authority in determining levels of risk that are acceptable. And we have a marine mammologist or wildlife biologist that we could get more details on these specific studies if you'd wish in the future. But I think that's overall a summary of how we're approaching that.
Thanks, Donna. Hey.
You want me to stand up? My name is Jolene Lambert. I am a deckhand, and I work on a boat for many years, over 10 years. I've got a few questions. The one is, what are the plans decommissioning the wind farms? What's the criteria? And the second one is, are there funds for mitigation to the fleet for losing fishing grounds and the habitat destruction and the ecosystem alterations?
Okay, who can answer that one? Two questions there about mitigation for loss of fishing and about decommissioning.
I'll weigh in first, and I'll just say that it was kind of hard to hear that question. So if I'm off base, then, let me know. I will say that, as I previously stated, commercial fishing is important, and the Bureau knows that. And we are working on a Bureau-wide, mitigation guidelines now. So it's something that we're, paying attention to. We know that it's something that comes up. We hear it a lot. And, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're addressing it as we can. I think at the end of the day, it's hard to know what the impacts are until we get a proposed project and we get something that's actually into us. But it is something that, we are learning from what they've done on the Atlantic, where they are ahead of us and they have projects, and construction operation plans where they do, and mitigation comes up. And so I think that it's something that, we will definitely have the advantage of the experience on the Atlantic coast for us here in the Pacific as we move forward. And that, it is something that the Bureau is, seriously interested in and considering to make sure, we want to do this correctly. We want to do it right. We want to find how, we can coexist with offshore wind and the fishing community. So that was the question that I heard. I believe there was another question, but I can't.
Yep.
I
This
don't.
is Second question, Doug, had to do with mitigation funds available for the loss of fishing grounds. Is that right?
Right. And I'll say that, BOEM can't direct funds, but a part of our, mitigation guidelines that we're having, that is one of the potentials. And I can say too that, and I'll just give the example for, in California that, in our proposed sale notice, we do have a fisheries communication plan and a fisheries liaison. And a part of their plan, they have to develop a process for, if something happens during the survey work and, a met buoy and there's loss of gear, that there is a plan to at least fishers can make a claim. So that is something, that's what we're doing here in the Pacific. And as we move forward with the process, we get into the actual projects, it'll be something that, is going to be that we're going to look at. And like I said before, we do have the advantage of learning from what they've done on the Atlantic and, making that work here in the Pacific too.
And if I may, I just would like to present a quick overview of the process of how BOEM approaches looking at a project and preventing impact to either the physical or the human environment. And so we have something called a mitigation hierarchy. And the first step is to try to avoid any impact possible, right? And then the second one is to try to minimize the impact. And then the third one would be to mitigate the impact. And so what we would like to do, like one of the purposes of these early meetings, when we present the call areas, is like, how can we've got these draft areas, and the feedback we'd like to have is, what options should we consider to try to avoid or minimize impact? And then once those options are exhausted, then we look at mitigation. And so it's a continual process, and mitigation is the last step. So it's hard for us to get really specific answers because we don't know what the impact is going to be at this point. And our efforts right now are trying to avoid and minimize impacts. So any information that you can help us to do that would be great and really critical at this time.
Thanks, Donna. Whitney, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I thought I heard a two-part question, and the second was on the fishing mitigation pieces, which I think Doug and Donna did a nice job responding to. But I thought I heard the first question was understanding the decommissioning and that criteria. So I just wanted to address, Doug provided an overview in terms of our responsibility to the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, and that we have financial assurance requirements in place in the case that the leaseholder wasn't, if they were bankrupt, for example, and weren't able to remove the project. But assuming that's not the case, there are decommissioning requirements in the lease itself that a few years prior to the project end, the decommissioning, that lessee is required to provide a plan to BOEM for review and approval that outlines how decommissioning would occur. So it's a requirement of the lease, which is, for the, prior to anything going into the water, that the lessee is aware of the responsibility that everything needs to be removed from the federal waters as a part of the condition of the lease. And then at the end towards the end of the project life, they are required to provide a plan for BOEM review and approval of how that project would be decommissioned.
Thank you, Whitney. So I just wanted to, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the room who would like to ask additional questions. And then we've got 5 people online. So I just wanted to just let people know kind of who's in the queue. So what I'd like to do is have the people in the room ask their questions, and then we'll move to the people online. And so this gentleman here is next.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify some of the process here. My name is Mike Broyley, and I'm with the Mid-Coast Watershed Council. Being the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, I'm sure you're aware of the wave energy project off Newport here. And so my question is, that project seems far less intrusive, far less impactive on a number of levels. And so I'm a little uncertain as to what the benefit of wind energy is to the wave energy project, which has already got the cable laid and well underway. The main issue being any energy release from the cable itself, which this project will test. And until we have the answer to that, wind energy has got the same sort of issues that haven't been answered yet. So that's sort of my question. I'd like to know the comparison between the two and why one is being considered over the other.
I think that's a perfect one for Whitney to weigh in on.
Yeah, I was looking at the boss if he wanted me to answer or not. So thanks, Doug. So the Packwave South project off of Newport is it's a marine hydrokinetic energy project, MHK project for wave energy. And BOEM did provide a lease to Oregon State University for that project. And it's to understand the sort of the research and development of wave energy technologies. And it's really exciting work, and OSU has done a wonderful job. I guess to say that, BOEM is not the decider of what technology is ready for commercial utility scale, power delivery. And so I think the Packwave South and, all the work that OSU is doing is understanding, how wave energy could enter the utility scale power delivery market. And my understanding is that today wave energy is not viable for commercial utility scale. So it's too expensive currently. So that's why it's great to have a, world-class test facility to try to bring down those costs and to see if it would be commercially viable in the US. For offshore wind energy, it is a demonstrated commercial technology that is available. And so within BOEM, it's another technology that BOEM has the authority to provide a lease to for that technology. So it's for mineral energy, including renewable energy, it's marine hydrokinetic and offshore wind technologies.
Thanks, Whitney. Okay, we've got this gentleman here, and then you'll be on board, and then you'll be right after.
Mike Okoneski, I've been in the business 53 years, fish business that is. I ran plants for quite a few different companies, but for Pacific, I ran 3 Oregon plants before I was sent up to take over the Alaska operations. I've worked in all 4 states, Alaska, California, Oregon, Washington. And can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay. Yeah, you got to be real close on this one. I have a question for this lease process. And we brought up numerous times, I should say a little bit more. I'm also in the marine planning ad hoc committee that the Pacific Council has going on. And I've got 2 other subcommittees I'm on as well, and groundfish and CPS. So I've got a background of, in the fishery business. And I so far, from what I've seen on the East Coast and what I have seen out here, I still think that this is the biggest threat to the fishing industry that's ever come along. However, the question, I'm a little bit baffled by the lease goes out, you pick the area you're going to lease, and then there's no programmatic EIS, so we have no idea, or not a very good idea from the EA. It doesn't go very deep into habitat and other things that might be a game changer for the lease area. Then the developer goes out there and does the surveys for roughly a year and a half, 2 years, gets all that information. And you find there's a problem. Now, he's paid for the lease, I believe. I don't know if he get his money back. I don't see how it would be the developer's fault, or liability, if you hand out the lease and then he finds out that the ground is not, or the area is not suitable for whatever reason. And does he get his money back, or what happens then? Because I'm totally confused on this thing. And I'll leave it at that for now. I've got other questions, but I'll let somebody else ask some first. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It's nice to meet you in person too. Who's going to answer that one?
You know, I'll take a stab at that one. And thanks, Mike. Good to see you again. I will just say, you're right. We're working with the best information we have. Our intent right now that we're going through it in this planning process is that we're trying to find the areas that are most suitable for leasing. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of data and information that we don't have and that we won't get until we have the lease, and the lessee will be out there. And it is, I think lessees know that, that they're aware that, they see the data just like everyone else of what we have. But there is the potential that, when they do the surveys, they get out there and, find something that, may make the area not suitable for leasing. And I think that's the risk that they run. But I hope to, say that we have enough information and we're identifying areas that we don't find those things, when they get out there and do the survey work. But again, at the end of the day, we don't have everything, and that's why it's hard to do a full EIS, because we don't have all the survey information. We don't have the project proposal. So I think that it's just a matter of timing. We will do the full-blown EIS on a project. We will look at cumulative impacts as a part of those EISs as they move forward. It's just, the BOEM process is, we do the leases, and then the lessees are responsible for collecting the data and information. And then we can move forward with a well-informed decision as a project gets proposed.
Thanks, Doug. So I'm going to take 2 more questions in the room. I've got this gentleman and the woman in white. And then I'm going to switch to, we've got 5 people at virtual that would like to ask their questions. So I'm going to come over and see you. And your name and
My name is Craig Cochran. I've been a fisherman here for quite a few years. More than many of you have been alive. But I see a number of different, in my lifetime, I've watched dams be built, and I've watched some of those dams be torn out, even though there was a lot of damage done to salmon fisheries and habitat. I've seen the area you're going to put these, probably the birds you're talking about are albatross, shearwaters, things like that you don't see here on the beach, but they're there. Some of them, some of the albatross, like the short tail, which we don't have too many of here, but are endangered or threatened. I see safety. I remember in 1959 being on a tuna boat off Cape Blanco. We didn't have any choice in which direction we went. We ended up in Eureka finally. It blew a little hard that day. And I think with this wind farm right in the way, I don't see how we could have turned to avoid it. We'd have probably been right through it. If something like that, I realize there's better weather reports now and other things, but if something like that happened, are you people that are putting this together going to go see the widow and kids and tell them, well, we did this, but it's too bad. I can I can see things like that happening. And I've been involved in the salmon fishery, tuna fishery, crabs, all the dragging and whiting. The family still has 3 boats that fish in the whiting fishery and shrimp and crab. But I just feel that there's not enough looked at here. Cape Blanco is right at a point where the current comes in there and divides. The flora and the fauna south of Cape Blanco are different than what it is above on land, because it creates a little difference in the weather there. That's one of the things that makes this a lucrative spot to fish down there, with the current coming in and it's a hot spot as far as biologically the fishing, and I just think there needs to be a whole lot more thought go into this than what there is now, and a lot of study before anything is released. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Heather.
As well, and that is who is responsible for things that could happen. So if a boat is allowed to be in there and there is an accident, we just saw one happen in England. Who is responsible if somebody is injured or killed from recreational fishing in that area, or commercial fishing, or any of, traversing through there? Who's responsible?
Thanks, Heather. I'll take a stab at that. And I'll just say that first and foremost, it's hard to speculate on this, but I can say, for ocean going vessels, the Coast Guard is responsible. These structures out there, it's hard to say because I don't know the circumstances of what's going on, but it's definitely, Coast Guard jurisdiction for safety out there, as well as our sister agency, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. So without, getting into too much of the detail and speculative, I can say that safety is always the utmost importance to everyone, and that's something that will be, looked at, especially when we get a construction operation plan, a navigational safety risk assessment will be a part of that plan. It'll be evaluated by the Coast Guard, so like I said, safety is in everyone's mind because no one, wants to think about the unthinkable. But of course, we're, take that into consideration, as decisions are made.
Thanks, Doug.
So I'm going to stand just to introduce myself, but then I'm going to sit to read. So my name is Kelly Rethford. I am part of a 3-generation fishing family out of Newport, Oregon. And we have been in the fishing industry for 40 years. I have 3 sons on the ocean on 3 different fishing vessels as we speak. In fact, they have actually tried to zoom in, but you know how that works on the ocean. There ain't much Wi-Fi. So I am here with part of my family as they sit across from me. And so my question this morning, well, maybe I will just stand. So as we talk about these call areas and you guys wanting to hear the fisheries, I just want to ask, what's the true purpose here of listening to the fishermen? And the reason I asked that question, as Doug stated, it should be all this conversation and everything that's going on should be transparent. Well, as we were talking earlier, as was spoken earlier, there's call areas that have been placed on our map outside the coast here. And you have given fishermen the opportunity to go in and fill in the box through the oral maps. And so my question in asking this is, you've given fishermen who fish the ocean, and like I said, are even out at this point, most of our fishermen are on the sea because it's hake season, shrimp season, and there's trawlers, salmon fishermen. They're all on the ocean, but through these oral maps, you are asking fishermen to fill in the blank or the box, which is the call area, which we know a lot of the captains and boat owners and individuals don't have their track lines for the last 3 decades. So anyway, as you're considering these BOEM call areas along, and you're wanting them to fill in these boxes, what good is it going to do? And I ask that with respect because you too also have all the information from National Marine Fisheries Service, MTC, VMS's, the list goes on, NOAA Fisheries, FRAM. And I know that's true because we also are not just fishermen. We do scientific surveys for the ground fish trawl on the West Coast and have for over 25 years in some capacity or another. So I know you have everything that you could ever want to fill in those boxes that say, we're fishermen, we fish that call area, Alpha Coos Bay down off Bandon. And so how much more of that box needs colored in before you respectively consider maybe not choosing that call area and respectively moving it outside the prime fishing ground in which it is. And so this isn't to say, sometimes when we choose options, we don't always choose the right option the first time. And I'm asking you guys, is there other options beside these call areas? And what's the true purpose of the fishermen filling in this box for you? And how much of it needs filled in before you would reconsider these call areas here on the Pacific Coast? Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a great question. And I will just say, you know, I agree. Or I'll say we do have some data, and you know, Frank and the team, you know, I believe we have maps in the back of the room that has more data, you know, and we kind of, you know, part of this outreach and communication is that data correct? You know, is what we have in the boxes the correct data that we should be evaluating when we're trying to make decisions on wind energy area for the call areas? Because if it's not correct, we want to get feedback on that too. If the data that we have is wrong, where does the fishing occur? Where do those activities happen so that we are making decisions on, the most accurate and up-to-date data that we can. So I think that's why, we're, having these meetings, and that's why the feedback is so important. And that's why we plan on showing our work to say, this is what we considered, this is the data and information that we had, this is how we came to this decision, because we owe that to everyone. So I will say that's why we're here. That's why we want to have the discussions. And if our data is correct, then that's helpful feedback too. And if it's not correct, how can we make it better? So we do appreciate that. And I'll just reiterate again, that's why we're here, because it is important to us as we make our decisions moving forward.
Can I go ahead and add on to that as we're talking about the maps? This package here are lines that we did through the maps, through the scientific survey with the ground fisheries. So the maps, from what we've seen through all of the different organizations, whether it's NOAA or FRAM or whatever, they've been made by individuals and multiple of the boats. And anyway, we have that. And that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking how much more of these call areas within that those boxes do you need filled in before you will reconsider the options of not putting wind farms in our pristine fishing grounds here off of the coast? You guys can move them. There's, like I said, you have many of options. sometimes the first option, which is the call areas that you've provided, aren't always the right first option. There's more options. And us as fishermen know what the lines are. We have them too. And what I'm saying is you guys have them from multiple entities, multiple groups. And how much more of the boxes need to be proofed to consider maybe that you might have picked the wrong spot and you'd be willing to work with the fishermen and the fishing communities to maybe address this issue. So I'm just, we don't need more lines. You guys might, but we don't know we need more lines. We've been doing this for decades. I stand here for 40 years working alongside my family as we make these lines and bring in this harvest. And that's all I'm asking is how much more of the box needs filled in and how many more people need to have the right answer in order to reconsider. Thank you.
I'll just follow up and say that's great information, and I'll say from a BOEM perspective, we're definitely, we are going to avoid the areas that, we're trying to reduce conflict. Are we going to get to zero conflict? I doubt that we'll get to zero conflict, but if we can get to the most reduced conflict that we can so that we can have, two industries move forward together is something that we're trying to achieve. So I think that, if I look at the data that we currently have, at least what I see is that there are areas where there is less fishing and there are areas where there is more fishing, and that's very helpful information that, I think what I'm hearing is that the areas that we have marked where there's more fishing seems to be pretty accurate. But if it's not, then please let us know. Because we are really looking for those areas. I don't think that we can find the area where there's no fishing, but if there are areas out there where there is less conflict, then that would be helpful in us making our decisions moving forward.
Thanks, Doug. Heather, go ahead. Closer to the mic.
I don't think I can get closer. So if you want to be transparent, Doug, and I think you do, the answer to the question is no. You will not reconsider these areas based on the information that's provided.
I wouldn't say no, but I would say that, if we have all the data and information, we can make a well-informed decision. So I think that we are looking to make sure that we have all the data so that when we do make decisions, it's well informed. And if we move forward with wind energy areas in the call areas, that, we took that into consideration. And, like I said before, we'll show our work and we will be able to explain, the data that we took into consideration and how we developed the call areas. The wind energy areas, sorry.
So if I may add just one aspect also to the public so they can understand how federal agencies do their process according to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And so the main question is there's a purpose and need for every federal action. And so our purpose here is to try to identify areas that might be suitable for potential offshore wind energy. And so a heart of a really good NEPA process is to try to understand what alternatives we might be able to have that would fit the overall purpose. And that's where public outreach can be really important. We've got a large area and we want to hear feedback from the public about different alternatives we might be able to have from this first cut. But also remember, and I mentioned this before, that in our NEPA analysis, we always have a no action alternative. And so that no action alternative is always present in a federal action. So we use that as sort of a baseline and to compare according to various options. So that no action alternative is actually present in our analysis. And should the public want to emphasize that would be the preferred choice, that is certainly an option that you can have.
Thanks, Donna. Heather, I wanted to check in with you. We've got 6 people who want to speak from our virtual room. We're at about 9:45, and we had talked about doing a break and then moving into the formal public comment. Seems to me like we should spend a little more time in the Q&A time, given the number of people that we have. So I just wanted to check and see if you're comfortable if we made the formal public comment maybe a little after 10, but what do you think?
I think getting to the people that are online is important with their questions. And I guess I would just wonder how many people have actually formally signed up for public comment and use that to weigh as well. But I think we should go to those questions and then take maybe a shorter break and just go to public comment after.
Okay, thanks. And we have one more question in the room as well. I think we've got 15 people signed up for public comment. 17, and then possibly some online. So that gives us a gauge. Okay, so we probably should start public comment by 10:15 to make sure to make space for all that. All right, I'm just doing some logistics. So there's one more question in the room. I'm going to grab you, and then we're going to go to the folks online. And for people online, Dan Waldick, you're going to be first. But we do have one more in the room.
It's a short one, short question. This whole thing sounds very expensive. When we have solar for electricity, for energy. I also want to understand why we need to do this on the ocean when you can do it on land. The land is more accessible for if you have problems. You know, if there's an oil leak, the ocean, if there's an oil leak, it's going to mix. That's what I want to know with the wind energy. But what are the other options that are less expensive?
Doug Whitney?
I'll say that's a great question, and you are 100% correct. And I'll just, kind of go back to the basics from a BOEM perspective is we make the areas available. Just because we have a lease and a lease sale does not mean that a project is going to go forward. That is just the first step in a long process. I will say that at the end of the day, someone onshore has to buy that power. And typically, that falls to the utility or the state who is going to approve that. BOEM has no say in that. So our lease just makes it available. And if there's a lessee, they're going to have to, come up with a power purchase agreement. They're going to have to sell that power that is at a reasonable rate to get approved by the state and, come into the grid. So I just, there are a lot of options out there for renewable energy and, offshore wind, just because there's a lease, it's still going to have to compete with the rest of those to make sure that, a project were to go forward, because no project is going to be built if there is not a power purchase agreement to buy that power. And I did just want to weigh in and say, I'm planning to travel to the Coos Bay meeting and the Gold Beach meeting on Friday. So I have to travel to get there. So I only have probably 10 more minutes. And if the questions are still ongoing, then, the rest of the team will be here to answer those questions. But I do only have 10 more minutes. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. So we're going to go ahead and move to our online. We've got 6 people signed up to speak. The first one is Dan Waldick. And Dan, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself, you can put yourself on camera if you would like, and then introduce yourself and remind us who you're with.
Thank you, Jamie. I see that the mic shows I'm being picked up pretty well. Good morning. It's good to see and hear all of you again. My name is Dan Waldeck. I am the Executive Director of the Pacific Whiting Conservation Cooperative. We represent the companies that own and operate catcher processor vessels in the Pacific Whiting or Pacific hake fishery. These are 300-foot vessels that both catch and process fish through the summer and the fall. They employ hundreds of people per vessel. It's an important segment of the fishery. The recent conversation about data really tees up the thrust of what I wanted to speak to, and that's there was a strong emphasis, a strong focus during the presentations about the utility, the benefits of the OraWind tool, and in terms of its utility to fishermen to understand potential impacts. And I guess, I think for all tools, and I think we recognize this, fishermen especially recognize this, that a tool is only as useful as the design allows it to be. And I think it's clear that the data that currently is OraWind map is incomplete, and it is inconsistent in the time series that are included. And I think that's a serious issue. Especially it doesn't include the most recent 5 years of data, 2017 to present. I think this issue has been raised every time we've seen the OraWind presentation, all the way back to the first time I think we saw it many months ago. I think this issue has been raised by the industry, by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and by National Marine Fisheries Service, that the data is incomplete and it should be fixed. Why this is important? It's important because the fishery has changed remarkably since 2017. There is much more effort concentrated in Southern Oregon than there was in previous years, and maybe the fishermen in the room will be able to speak more to this under public comment. But I think Whitney spoke to avoiding and minimizing as the first orders of business. And Doug, you mentioned that you're using the best information you have, and so I guess the question is, what if it isn't the best information? What process? And I'm asking from an agency standpoint, not from well, you tell us what information you have and we'll include it. The information that I look at when I have our contractor pull up the NIVS data, the VMS data, and run analyses of our footprint, that's the same data that you have available to you. And so I think putting the burden on the industry to prove where we fish, I think that's inappropriate. You are the agency, you have a responsibility to do your job correctly. If you're going to avoid and minimize, if you're going to use the best information available, that is the transparent requirement that you've committed to taking. So, if I look at the last 5 years of data for the catcher processors and the mothership sector, which is another large segment of the at-sea fleet, there literally is no area in the Brookings call area that is not important to the at-sea sectors, the whiting fishery. And similarly, up in the Coos Bay area, you could find small areas where fishing hasn't occurred. But we're talking about, again, 300-foot vessels that are towing large nets that have to navigate through these offshore wind arrays. And so I'll wrap up by saying, if you're going to do an appropriate analysis of the potential effects of these areas, you need to have the right data. You have that data available to you. The lack of that data has been pointed out to you by the industry, by the council, by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So when will you complete that data and fix this problem? Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. It looks like Frank is getting the mic. You got to lean in, Frank.
Lean in. All right. Yeah, I can talk a little about this. We're working now on getting some of the newer VMS data and various projects for linking data sets and stuff. But newer VMS data should be coming out soon. I can't tell you an exact date, but we're working with various partners, with NIMS and with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission to get these data sets together. And we hope to have something soon. But yeah, anything that you have that can be helpful, great. That's something we can get. If you've got it, we're happy to hear from you. But no, it's something we're working on. We hope to have it soon. Can't give you a date just now.
Okay, next up on our virtual question and answer is Craig Rose.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
You're coming through good, Craig. Remind us who you're with.
Yes, I'm Craig Rose. I'm a marine fisheries researcher that specializes in fishing gear and methods. And in this process, it seems that the fishermen don't really have detailed information on what the wind facilities would actually take, and the wind facilities have little information about how fisheries operate. And I'm wondering where in the process there is an opportunity for those two groups to exchange information and try to find what possibilities may exist for coexisting. Or right now, pretty much a fisherman has to say, if that box is important to me, I need to say X, you can't, I'm giving it up. Or if it goes away. But it seems that there needs to be better understanding on both sides of how each industry operates and where those interactions could be mitigated. Or so where in the process does that happen?
Thanks for your question, Craig. Who would like to answer that?
I'll say that that's a great question, Craig, and that's something that we do grapple with here in the Bureau. And I think the first step in the process is, like I said previously, we're trying to find the areas with the least amount of conflict. And once we have a lease sale, one of the things that we do have, and I'll say that good or bad, Oregon is slightly behind California where things are moving. And part of the proposed sale notice that we have for California is, we have a fisheries communication plan and a fisheries liaison that's required. So once there's a lessee, they have to develop a plan, and then there's a part of that communication plan. They have to report back to us every 6 months on their interactions with the fishing community. Our intent is that once there's a lessee, that the lessee will reach out to the fishing community and develop a plan in conjunction with each other, so that, as a lessee is developing a plan, the fishers are having an opportunity to provide input into that plan. So if there are things that need to be done, as part of the site layout, or, the cabling, or perhaps the anchoring, that can be developed together. So that there can be solutions that are found, and because that's something that, the Bureau is, it's important to us to make sure that, plans aren't developed, because what we don't want at the end of the day is, a lessee develops their plan, gives it to BOEM and says, here's what we've got. And then, of course, you're going to say, oh, well, we can't change things now. But we're hoping that as they develop these plans, in collaboration with the fishing community, that would, by the time we get a construction operation plan to evaluate in the future, that, it's been, the fishing community has had the opportunity to provide input into that, because then it'll make things go smoother in the long run. But that's when it'll happen is, like I said, we're reducing the conflict as best as we can now, knowing that, it's really just the beginning of the conversation between the lessee and the fishing community as they develop that plan before BOEM ever sees that plan. Is our intent.
Thanks, Doug. The next question we have online is from Chris Rutherford. Chris, introduce yourself and remind us who you're with, and unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming through good.
You got me good?
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Chris Rutherford. I'm a commercial fisherman off the West Coast here. My mother spoke earlier. I'm one of those boats that are out on the water right now. Actually, I'm off of the Coos Bay site right now, actually towing. It's beautiful out here, especially without looking at windmills or dodging them. But my question is for you guys is why the ocean? Why would we jeopardize a protein that feeds the world? Why would we even, what are the effects? Do you know the effects that could have on this ecosystem of putting these cables and chains and these turbines up, stirring up the wind and changing our currents and tides? Why would we even mess with that? And so without the right data, how can we even jeopardize even a fraction of this ecosystem that is so fragile, that we've spent our lives, that I've spent my life out here trying to preserve for my kids and their kids. And then all of a sudden we can just, oh, hey, it's a good idea. Let's throw some turbines on the water and hopefully it don't mess with anything. How can we move forward with this without more studies on what this will do to us? The California current. I'm not talking about just in Oregon, Northern California. I mean, what's that going to do to the currents that push up through our land? What is it going to do? Is there studies? Is there enough information to do this correctly? Because we feed the world. Do we want to jeopardize that? Or how much will we give up in that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm looking.
I'll weigh in, and then I think Donna can probably weigh in on the study side. And I will just say that, why the ocean is that, it's more consistent and better wind offshore. So, ultimately you get a better renewable energy resource because you're able to go out into the ocean. So it's more consistent and better winds offshore than it is on land. Solar, the sun comes up and the sun goes down and it peaks at noon, and offshore wind, peaks later in the afternoon when solar is not peaking. So it's very complementary. So there are a lot of advantages to having, wind turbines offshore. And with that, I'll say Donna will take over for the the studies discussion or question, and I will just have to say, Elena and Nick and Lori, I'm going to have to drop off, but I will hopefully see maybe some of you tomorrow in Coos Bay or down in Gold Beach on Friday. But with that, I'll say thank you very much. I do appreciate meeting today, and it was great input. And as always, it's been a pleasure, and look forward to continuing the dialogue the next couple of days and into the future.
Thank you, Doug. We'll look forward to seeing you the next couple days. Hey, Donna, I just want to give you just to let you know that we've got 3 more people wanting to make public comment, and we're at almost 10:15. So just wanted to give you that so you can gauge your answer.
Thank you. So I will answer part of the question about the environmental studies. And as I mentioned before, BOEM has an environmental studies program. And our website is a great place to find out all the information. And we have done, hundreds of millions of studies over the years, hundreds of millions of dollars of studies over the years. And we have developed specific presentations that you can download from our website that will describe in detail the different aspects. Like, for instance, we have a theme about potential marine mammal impacts, seabird impacts to fish and fisheries. And I think that would be a good place to start if you wanted to have more specific answers. And also we have what we call brochures that summarize all the different studies that we've done and funded relating to these specific impacts. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to give that brief overview because it's that's a really big question, and it's kind of beyond the scope for me to answer for every details. But if you have, interest in specific studies, I would start at our website, or even just send us an email, and then we can forward that relevant information to you.
Lean in, Whitney. Right up close.
The study brochures that Donna mentioned, we printed out and they're available in the back of the room. That gives you a summary of each of these studies that it's relevant to offshore wind, offshore Oregon.
Thanks, Whitney. Hey, Yelena, you're up next. So if you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and remind us who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yelena Novak. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Trout Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. My question will be about the programmatic environmental impact statement, and it's unfortunate that Doug had to jump off. BOEM keeps repeating themselves to us when asked why programmatic environmental impact statement, or also known as PACE or PEIS, has not been done for such a massive industrial scale development of the outer continental shelf specific to the West Coast with a technology that has not been used yet. Yes, there are floating offshore wind farms. Is there any deep water floating offshore wind farm? Not to my knowledge. And the rationale for BOEM's decision why they cannot perform PACE is they don't know which technology will be used on a project to project basis. And I guess, does it really matter what type of shape of the anchor will be dragged 30 feet under the surface of the seabed? I guess I don't know. But as far as the impacts from the generic deep water floating technology to the seabed, ecosystem, environment, and all those things, upwelling is the big one, as already was mentioned by Chris Rutherford before. I noticed that Department of Energy that sets a strategy for BOEM to develop outer continental shelf, including for offshore wind. In their document on January 2022, wind strategy, they indicated that for the Pacific Coast region, for the sustainable and responsible deployment of offshore wind, upwelling must be studied as a regional phenomenon. In my opinion, humbly, that would be a great opportunity for upwelling to be studied as part of the programmatic EIS on a cumulative scale. As we already know, there is the couple areas of Central and Northern California coast. There is the Brookings area. And in the comments to the California Coastal Commission, we already saw that Del Norte area there is interest for the area in between Brookings and Humboldt site. So I guess, Donna, I point my question to you. Can you please explain what is the reason why BOEM cannot perform programmatic EIS? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question, Elena. I'll do my best to try to answer it. Remember, I'm at not at a level where I make the decision to go or no go with a programmatic EIS, but I do know a lot about NEPA. And a programmatic EIS, and we have actually done a programmatic EIS as an agency under our former name called the Minerals Management Service for renewable energy. We called it alternative energy at that time. And we looked at various scenarios and potential impact. And that was actually really important in guiding our agency forward and how to approach developing a renewable energy program. So we have done a programmatic EIS in the past. And so one thing about NEPA, which is the law that outlines the requirement and the specifics of how to do an environmental impact statement, it always is tied to a federal decision. And so some of the reasons that you have listed about different studies and so forth, you can do all these impact studies without an EIS. In fact, we do have a very active ongoing environmental studies program to produce that information that eventually feeds into NEPA documents, whether it be an environmental impact statement, site-specific or programmatic, or in these smaller analyses that we often term environmental assessments. And so a programmatic environmental impact statement has to be linked to a specific federal action. And so for the reasons that you stated, the need for more information is not a specific federal action. It is just information that we use to make potential decisions in the future. And so we can do all those things that you said without an environmental impact statement. And we are doing that. In fact, you mentioned one specific issue, upwelling, and we fund our own studies, but we also, we're not constrained. We use any kind of scientific information that's available. And we are in discussions with some studies that have been funded by another agency on the potential impacts of upwelling. So that is an area that we are paying attention to get information to inform our decision making, and the decisions that we make. As you know, some of them would be, where are we going to potentially have lease areas, certain criteria, what lease stipulations might be important, and what kinds of mitigations and criteria, conditions of approval we might put on for a COP. And so the reason, one of the reasons, there are a number of reasons, but we are interested in producing this information in a timely fashion. And so we are moving ahead, addressing all those issues that you mentioned without having a programmatic EIS. And so this is a great time for us to receive your feedback, which you've just done, and we are recording on the things that are important. And so none of the things that at this point have risen in importance to the degree that we would need a programmatic EIS to address those concerns. But that doesn't mean that your concerns are not being addressed. They're just not being addressed under a programmatic EIS, because we believe it's a little bit more timely to get those answers to your questions directly without having to have that extra programmatic EIS in the mix.
Thanks for that, Donna.
Me?
Lean in, Abby, or
Okay.
there you go.
I also wanted to mention, Yelena, that tomorrow, POET, the Pacific Ocean Energy Trust, is going to be presenting some information on upwelling currents. So I know that you will probably be attending the meeting, but they do record their webinars and are planning on recording that. So if you do a search for POET webinars, you will be able to, once it gets posted, watch the webinar about a current upwelling study that's being funded by the OPC in California. And that we talked to them about as well.
Thanks, Abby. So we've got two more folks with questions for virtually. Nick Edwards, you're next. And then, and after Nick is Lori Steele. So after we hear from Nick and Lori.
Right now.
Yeah, there you are, Nick. Awesome. Then we'll take a break after Lori and move into the formal public comment. So just want to let folks know. Go ahead, Nick.
I guess you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you.
Okay, great. For the record, my name is Nick Edwards. I'm here representing Shrimp Producers Marketing Cooperative. We have about 30 vessels that fish pink shrimp in Oregon, Washington, and California waters. Whitney, I believe in your opening statement there, you talked a little bit, but I believe you referred to the 1,300 meter depth as the techno eco limit. Was wondering about that. But this is the first time in your presentations that you guys are steering away from going outside of 1,300 meters. In our governor's letter to BOEM to you guys, we've asked you to go beyond the 1,300 meter depth. This would minimize the impacts to our existing user groups and our ecosystems, obviously. And my question, Whitney, is to you, is that how does BOEM address a developer that has the technology and is interested in acquiring a lease outside of 1,300 meters to 2,600 meters to help minimize the impacts to the existing user groups? Because these developers do exist. BOEM has recognized that these developers have the technology that can go outside of 1,300 meters to 2,600 meters. On April 27th, BOEM released 2 call areas in the Central Atlantic planning area. These sites are E and F, which are located 56 miles offshore in a depth of 13 to 2,600 meters off of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and North Carolina. Why can't Oregon have the same? I know it would set you guys back a year or two in the process, but this is 10 years down the road that this is going to happen. You want to get it right the first time. There are developers that are willing to go outside of 1,300 meters. And why shouldn't we have the same opportunity here in Oregon?
All right.
Folks are clapping, Nick. Whitney's got the mic.
Great. Thanks, Nixon. It's a good question. So in our sort of beginning back in 2019 and discussing a sort of proactive planning approach, we are trying to understand where offshore wind is commercially viable. And that was that 1,300 meter bathymetry line, and it was developed in coordination with the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I understand that in terms of development, it's not 1,300 meters is viable and 1,301 is unviable in terms of commercial development. It was just a sort of a reasonable bound. And as part of the Oregon call, I mean, BOEM is not a technology developer for offshore wind, and we understand that. In the development of the call, we've reached out to industry to try to understand if this is still a reasonable boundary, and it's our understanding that it is. But we're asking for comments from the industry to understand where offshore wind is commercially viable. You referenced the Central Atlantic call areas, and that's correct. Their planning process includes 4 call areas and 2 deep water call areas, which they referred to as frontier areas. And in the development, my understanding in the development of those areas didn't take into consideration the technology, offshore wind technology in those areas. And similar to Oregon, they're also asking, are these areas the right areas? Is there commercial interest in those? So I think I hope we're gonna learn with this public comment period to understand for deep water floating wind if it's commercially viable. I do want to note that the slope offshore Oregon is different from the slope offshore the Atlantic. And while the Atlantic looked at from 1,300 meters to 2,500 meter water depth, my understanding is that after you go through areas of steepness, so after the slope and you reach the abysmal plain where it's relatively flat for potential development, you're in areas of 2,500 meters in central or northern Oregon, and in southern Oregon, where the wind resource is stronger, you're in 3,000 meter water depths. And we have not heard or seen that is viable, but we'd really like to hear from the industry if it is.
Thanks for that, Whitney. Thanks, Nick. We're going to go ahead and move on to Lori, who's our last person to ask a question, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself and remind us who you're with.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Lori Steele, and I'm the Executive Director of the West Coast Seafood Processors Association. We represent shoreside processing companies up and down the West Coast. I will be brief with my question, and my question relates to some of the comments that Donna made, which I really appreciate, about the environmental and other laws that BOEM considers and evaluates projects against, specifically the Magnuson Act, NEPA, and the evaluations that inform your decision-making process. Recognizing that these impact assessments and the consistency determinations largely can occur at the construction and operations plan level. In terms of the environmental thresholds that you refer to, can you point me to a specific example or a specific project when BOEM has made a decision to significantly alter or halt an offshore wind project, or select the no action alternative due to some of these environmental thresholds and laws that you evaluate? When has the no action alternative ever been selected, or when has a project ever changed significantly once it's at the construction and operations point for these purposes?
Thanks for your question, Lori. Donna, it looks like that's directed to you.
Thanks, Lori. Offshore wind is very new to BOEM, and so we don't have that many examples. So I do not know of a situation where, because we're at the very beginning, where no action was selected on the West Coast here for offshore wind. But like I said, we're at the beginning. I do know that there's instances where leases have been issued that were not ultimately developed. And I can have some, we can look at that up later and tell you those instances, but I don't have that on the tip of my brain right now to give that to you. And that's why a lease decision is not this full-on blown out environmental impact analysis, because like I said, there's been many instances when a lease has been issued, but there has been no subsequent development. So there's that. I don't know, like, again, a specific where no actions, but I know in the scope of NEPA that has certainly occurred before. And for instance, this was a number of years back, there was a floating LNG project kind of proposed in Southern California. And I believe that might have been an example when it was determined to have a no action, because obviously we don't have any floating LNG off Southern California. I'm not 100% sure, but that is an example of kind of like an offshore energy project that's not under the jurisdiction of BOEM. That I think that might have been a situation where that occurred. So that was the other part. And then I'm sorry, remind me again, the other aspect of your question that you had. I think it was something about the COP, the construction operations plan. What was your question again?
Well, that essentially addressed it. I was wondering, you know, in lieu of selecting a no action alternative, when is there a specific example of when a COP or a lease area has been significantly altered due to the environmental thresholds or constraints or other laws?
Right. So I know that in other instances, in BOEM activities and in our former incarnation as the Minerals Management Service, there have been situations where we've altered significantly the project due to Endangered Species Act consultations. So I don't have those specific examples, the name of them, but if you really wanted to, we could probably look them up. So and these are done through consultations. So there are examples, but I don't have them available to tell you the specifics at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Donna. We do have a request for one more question in the room, and then we'll go ahead and take our break. I'll run back here and give you the mic. And do introduce yourself and remind us who you're with.
Mike Rutherford, this is my family. My son spoke earlier. My question is, with this database that you guys have collected, taking in consideration that VMS is, at the time that this database was collected, was 1 hour. It pinged every 1 hour. Now it's every 15 minutes. The other is the AIS data that came through. A lot of guys don't even have theirs on, like the shrimp boats, the crab boats. They don't have their AIS on. It's illegal now, but prior to, probably during this study, it wasn't required. And I guess my question is if you took the information that you have and put it through all these call areas, wouldn't that be enough to detour this area from being used? But my main point is the research data. I got a printout from NOAA or NIMS, whoever you want to call it, that indicates all the research tows that have been done in this call area for the last 25 years. And every bit of that call area is used. Wouldn't that be enough? If you throw all, if that call area remains in effect, all that information cannot be used because they can't go back in. So everything that has been collected for all these years is going to be thrown out. To me, just that alone would be enough to stand back, take a look at it, and maybe have second thoughts on where this area is going. Thank you.
Thank you. So what's going to happen now is, so Frank, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to answer. You want to answer his question?
Just, a bit of it on the VMS and the AIS, like we haven't really used the AIS. It's one part of the where is a vessel, and that'll be kind of used more going forward. But in the past, we haven't used it much. We are working with NOAA, to see where are your track lines for where you've been doing surveys and what. I don't see us I definitely don't see them getting rid of the data or anything, but we'll be working with them, talking to them. How can we go forward? Where can we have you be able to get the data you need? What's the most important? How can we go with that? Good. Do you want to speak to this a bit, Donna? I know you know a lot more about the NIMS data.
I did not hear anything that was said. I guess the microphone is not working. I heard you, Frank, but I think there might have been some words afterwards. I can't hear what was said. So if they could repeat it, maybe use a microphone or something, that would help.
Yeah, I'll bring the mic back.
I can't remember what it said now. Anyway, the question is, I guess I think Frank said that the information from the survey could not be used, or I said it could not be used, and I was told by higher ups that once that's thrown out, it's no longer usable. That there would be provisions to get back in there. There's no way. I mean, that we would ever get back into this area that has been closed off due to turbines. The other thing is once that information is gone, it's gone. So here's 20 some years of research that can't be used going forward. I think that was where we were going with this. But my question is this information available to you guys? And have you? I have a printout of it, of every tow, every cell that is within this call area. And if you guys are working with NOAA, you should have access to this. And I'm surprised that you don't.
And then the other part of your question was, would you have access in the area once if something was cited? So that was your, yeah.
There's no way that we can't. So the way the survey works is if we get into an area, another point I wanted to make out was the fact that you guys realize there is a underground fiber optic cable that runs right through that call area. I'm sure you were aware of that. So our protocol is when we do research is that if there's a cable within a cell is 2 miles up and down, 1.5 miles east-west. So within that cell, if there is one cable, we may have to drop that cell. Or if there's 2 cables, we'd have to most definitely drop the cell. If you can find a tow either above or below the cable, you're fine. So to say that we would be able to get in there with turbines, highly unlikely, okay? So.
Donna, did that help?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I'm going to respond that as far as we would love to have more details on the data that you have. I'm not sure if I understand what surveys that you're talking about. So it would help us to be able to look at the information that you have if you're willing to give it to us. And then also we do work extensively with our NOAA partners. And they have been helpful and responsive in sharing the data that they have. And so it will help us to try to understand what aspect that you think is missing. And then also is regarding fishing inside the potential lease area. Remember, BOEM doesn't specifically prohibit fishing in its regulations, but we do recognize and have been looking at the potential that it will be acting as like a de facto marine protected area or a fishing preclusion area. And to understand cumulative effects, we have been mapping and generating all these larger maps of where fishing preclusion would occur from this or other projects, either from, EFH conservation areas or just, other infrastructure that might prohibit fishing. So we're going to look at that by year. So we'll have a good understanding of trying to estimate the cumulative impacts of to fishing from preclusion that a wind energy area might have.
Thanks for that, Donna. And actually that question that you raised is a good segue into what's going to happen next. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to reconvene for those of you who've signed up for public comment. If you have a number, that means that we're just going to call you up in that order. But also during the public comment, we have stations in the back, and Frank will be at one and Andy will be at one, where they can dive into the data and Orwin map and your questions around data with you one-on-one. And so there's a table against the wall in the back corner. You'll see there's 2 computers set up. And so they'll be back there to work with you one-on-one on data questions that you have. And then we'll be doing formal public comment up here. Folks will come up and sit at the table. We've got 17 people signed up to do public comment. And so Heather, you'd asked how much time. And so just back of the napkin calculation, if people keep their comments to 3 to 4 minutes, certainly less than 5, then we'll be able to hear from everybody and also have some space for people online to sign up for public comment too. So does that seem appropriate?
I do want to check in with a couple of the folks that are online that don't have the opportunity to go to, they're in Seattle or they're out fishing hake. And I know several of them are online, and we're going to use this as their opportunity to provide public comment. So let me check in on that on the break.
Okay.
Please.
Yep. So let's take a 10-minute break. It is 10:43. So let's reconvene at 10:55. And Oregon Trawl Commission has provided some muffins and danishes in the back. There's coffee. Use the restroom, of course. And then if you've signed up for public comment, we'll call you in the order that with your number, and we'll give you some more instruction then. Test. Hey, folks, we've got about 2 minutes before we're going to move into our a formal public comment time. So grab your coffee. For Frank and Andy, if they can station themselves in the back with their computers. And so I'll give you, we got 2 minutes. They can work with you one-on-one on your data questions. And so we'll just ask that for folks that are working with Frank and Andy in the back of the room, just if you could keep your voices a little quieter so that people can hear the public comment in the front. And so for the public comment, if you've signed up, you have a number. We're going to ask you to speak in the order that you have your number. I also have a list in case you've misplaced your number. So I've got a list of your numbers and your names. A couple of things to keep in mind, as we mentioned before the break, we've got 18 people signed up for formal public comment. We'll ask that you keep your comments to 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll be able to hear from everybody. There'll be oh, go ahead, Heather. Yep. That was a great segue to the next thing. And so for today, if you can keep your comments to 3 to 4 minutes, we have a court reporter here, Shalene, and she requests that you spell your name when you come up, because that's how they can make sure it's in the official regulations.gov. And when you say your affiliation, say it a little slower so that she can make sure to grab that. The other thing, as Heather said, is you can go to regulations.gov. I put the information here. If you go to regulations.gov, there's a search, you put in BOEM Oregon. There's a number of things that you can put comments on, but you'll look for the request for information and nominations, commercial leasing for wind energy development on the outer continental shelf offshore Oregon. That's the official, that's what it looks like. Oh, Abby?
Question, Donna, that when you state your name and your affiliation, if you could also state exactly which fishery or fisheries that you participate in, waiting, then being scrapped, et cetera, because that helps our process. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got that on the screen here. So you've registered, you've got a number, state your name and spell it, speak clearly into the microphone, specify your fishery type. You can't be anonymous here in this room. And when you go online, you'll be asked to submit your name. Public comment is not accepted through the chat for our virtual folks. You need to sign up and get a slot. And you can use the workstations in the back of the room quietly. So I think that's everything that we need to know about. So I've put 2 chairs up here and there's the microphone, and Ariella's got a timer that she's going to put on the screen so we can keep track of time. And like I said, 3 to 4 minutes. So if you go over the 3, it's okay. But if you start getting to the 4, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up. Are we ready? All right. Number 1 is Representative David Gromberg.
Well, good morning. And for your record, I am David Gomberg, State Representative. That's Gomberg. And I might also mention very quickly that that my colleagues, senators and representatives from coastal districts, have also honored me with the responsibility of chairing our coastal caucus. Before I move to my comments, I just wanted to say we've spent 3 hours here today out of the total of 4 on background and questions, and that's been very interesting, but we know it's not on the record. And I hope that if there are people here that have comments and need a little extra time, that you will stay with us just as you did for the questions and answers. So, and my fishery type, I eat it. In 2021, the Oregon legislature considered House Bill 3375. They said, let's talk about wind energy. And if we're going to talk about it, if we're going to do it here, let's make sure we understand what it is we are doing. Let's make sure we understand who is affected and what the consequences might be. And I wanted to read to you just a section of that bill because I think it's important. It says, understanding the impacts, benefits, opportunities, and barriers of floating offshore wind energy with respect to Oregon's fishing communities, ocean and shoreside recreational users, tribes, ports, coastal ecosystems, natural resources, manufacturing industry, maritime sector, disaster recovery planning, workforce development, and electricity ratepayers, to maximize benefits to the state while minimizing conflicts between floating offshore wind energy and the ocean ecosystems and users. That's pretty comprehensive. We want to understand what we're doing, who it's going to affect, and what the consequences might be. Now, when we started talking about this federal proposal during the month of May, we coastal legislators organized 6 different listening sessions up and down the coast. We heard from more than 500 people. Just to make the record clear, BOEM is here organizing 3 sessions. Coastal legislators organized 6, and I hope that those recordings can become part of our formal record here. We heard from the fishing community, and they told us that the proposed call areas clearly conflicted with long-term established fishing grounds. They told us they were worried. They were worried about their jobs, their industry, their families, and their future. We heard from the scientific community, and they talked to us about the possible consequences of wind farms on upwelling or on the California current, on possible wind patterns. And in fact, several even mentioned the possibility that these large devices and undersea cables could affect ocean navigation, marine navigation. And that means our fishing fleets, our recreational fleets, and in fact, our Coast Guard might be thrown off course by these large devices. And we heard from the environmental community. We heard from the environmental community who talked about impacts on marine wildlife, bird impacts possible, that there were concerns about fish schooling, the seafloor, and whether or not these large devices and electromagnetic waves might in fact affect whale migration patterns. So we heard all these concerns. And we heard all these comments, and I will tell you candidly that I walked away with several clear impressions. One was that we were moving very, very quickly, and that we were moving in a direction that did not reflect the stated intention and desire of the state of Oregon through the legislation that I just outlined to you. Now, I'm going to say that another way, even more plainly. It seems to me that we sat down and said, here's where we want to do it. Now let's take some brief time and talk about whether or not it's a good idea. So in response to all of those listening sessions, the Legislative Coastal Caucus, yes, I know, but I'm going to take just a couple of moments here because we sent a letter to BOEM, and I wanted to not read the letter into the record, but share with you some of the recommendations we made. The first one was, let's slow down the process to better understand the risks and uncertainties to the ecosystem, economics, and coastal communities. Let's slow down a little bit. Locate those turbines beyond 1,300 meters in depth. In this regard, we agree with Governor Brown. The best available data suggests that this would reduce the impact on the California current and on upwelling. Fully review all the concerns about the marine habitat, marine bird and mammals, and environmental impacts. Fully review the effect of the longer transmission lines on energy costs. Fully review any effect on ocean navigation. Fully review commercial fishing outside 1,300 meters. Fully review. And finally, prioritize the best use of areas in terms of economic benefit to Oregon and the Oregon coast. In conclusion, I want to make it very clear. We here are not opposed to renewable energy. We want new opportunities, new industries, new jobs. But we want to make certain that they do not cost us existing jobs, existing industries, and existing opportunities. The final thing I wanted to say is before we went on the record today, I asked the question, these coal areas close to the California border, when they produce energy, where's that energy going? And the answer is we don't know. We don't know where the energy is going. And I just want to simply say that if Oregonians are going to incur the costs and the consequences of these wind farms, that we certainly ought to also receive the benefits of them when they arrive. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Representative Gombard. And if you could just leave your number on the table, I forgot to mention that, the little number. We have others, but we just wanted to, yeah.
All right, you've got my number.
I've got your number. Thank you. And so next up is John Paroulis. Thank you, John. And I just wanted to clarify, because I didn't say it in the beginning, that Whitney and Abby are here to listen during the public comment time.
Hello, everybody. John Paroulis, Parulis. I am a licensed contractor here in Oregon, also a filmmaker and ex-Greenpeace crewman. I spent many years saving whales up and down here, up in the Alaskan coast too. I think there's a missing component here, and it is an economic one. This book, Bright Green Lies by Derek Jensen, Lierre Keith, and Max Wilbert, has a chapter in it called The Wind Lie. And I really think you guys ought to check it out. There's a lot of data in there about the real costs of wind energy, like the production of steel, cement, the mining and minerals, which is all very fossil fuel intense. I mean, what we're basically here about is addressing climate change and fossil fuel abuse. And why use a renewable energy that's not going to net out? It's going to end up using more fossil fuel in its production and servicing. There's tremendous costs in oil that these windmills use that has to be serviced, delivered. There's data on them leaking. That's going to be leaking. It's all in this book. I have comments excerpted from here that I'd like to introduce into the record. But the thought I want to leave you with is that we're all on the same side here. We're trying to fight climate change. I'd prefer to call it climate collapse. And there may be a better solution to dealing with that than impacting an industry, which I support here, the fishing industry. And that may have to deal with agriculture in this state and finding ways of farming land that the Marin Carbon Institute in California has pioneered about tillage of soil, use of mycorrhizal networks to improve food quality, and carbon capture. We have what it takes to capture carbon in these great agricultural belts in this country and the whole world. And I think that has to be addressed. I realize you guys are doing your job. You've been given an assignment, and that's great. But I think we have to look at the overall impact of the costs of what we're asking to do here. And yes, whales are and marine mammal life is very important. The amount of ship traffic going through San Francisco Golden Gate, there are probably more whales being struck and killed by that ship traffic than Russian whalers that we used to fight back in the 70s. So there's a larger picture here, and I think that has to be entered into the equation. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Next up is Chris Cooper, number 3. And if you think about it, you can leave your number on the table, but we do have other numbers.
Good morning. My name is Chris Cooper, C-O-O-P-E-R. I'm a fisherman and participate in the whiting fishery at sea and shoreside, and also the groundfish fishery. I'm based out of Newport here. Just like my grandfather and father before me, my family's been making our living here for the last 3 generations by fishing these BOEM call areas off the coast of California and Oregon and Washington. I currently have boats fishing in these areas since our whiting fishing has started for the last 2 months. It's very typical for us to spend the majority of our time and to take an overwhelming majority of our fish out of these call areas this time of year. We can't just go fish somewhere else like has been suggested. You should trust me when I say that nobody wants to go fish south of Cape Blanco. It's just unfavorable weather down there, and no one's ever excited when we have to go that direction to fish. We go there because it's a productive area, and we have to go there to catch our fish. We have no other choice. This is where these fish congregate, and our targeted species are there that time of year. Since I first time I heard about these wind farm call areas, all I could think of was this is just wrong. And there's no way they can do this to us. You know, it's just too important to us to just kick us out of this area. And I've tried to wrap my head around this entire process and understand how a compromise could work if we could just sit down and have a voice at the table. I understand that renewable energy is part of our future, but I ask myself at what cost? What cost to the resource? What cost to Oregonians? What cost to local coastal economies that rely on these fisheries? You see, we just don't know what these impacts are going to be, how they're going to impact the ocean environment. And pushing ahead with this process without impact studies is a huge mistake and potentially a costly one for those of us whose way of life rely on access to these areas and the resources that live there. I just don't understand how the government can come in and lease out public land that current users have been using to survive off of for hundreds of years and displace us. After spending a great amount of time thinking all this through, I keep coming back to my initial reaction that this process is unfair and doesn't really consider the impacts it has on us and what it does to local Oregon fishermen. It's just wrong. There's no other way to put it. And I truly hope that members of BOEM not only consider but actually think about how their decisions to carry forward with these existing call areas will impact the lives of all the people you see in this room today. That concludes what I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. And Whitney, does Chris need to write his name and information on that in order for it to be accepted? Okay, all right. All right, thank you, Chris. Number 4 is Betty.
I'm Betty Kamikawa, Kamikawa. I am a Toledo City Council person. I'm the president of the Toledo City Council. I am also a groundfish aging specialist, and my husband works for NOAA. So, and he does those research surveys that Mike Rutherford was talking about. He goes out with Mike. So I'm not here representing those groups, though. I'm here representing myself and my family. And I consider myself a member of the fishing community because I live and work where fishing is a major industry, both commercially and recreationally, and an economic driver for my little city of 3,600 plus people. It's also a driver for the economy in Lincoln County and for the whole Oregon coast. Sustainable fisheries provide nationwide and worldwide a renewable source of healthy food, irreplaceable cultural heritage, and economic productivity. I considered myself to be a tree-hugging, bleeding heart liberal. I am a generational thinker. When possible, I look at the impact to future generations. How is this going to affect my kids, their kids, and so on and so on? Is it the right thing to do, or is it just the popular thing to do now? I am definitely for renewable energy. However, let's compare offshore wind energy with a brand new technology that we in Toledo have been promoting and trying to fund called Sustainable Renewable Energy Utility Systems, otherwise known as SIRIUS. SIRIUS works using sewage or any other hydrocarbon source. So you can run plastics through it. You can run the methane off of sewage through it. And methane is a big greenhouse gas. You can run the garbage. You can run plastics. You can run any hydrocarbon chain through a SIRIUS system. It just needs to be put into a slurry. And you can use seawater as the liquid for that slurry. Wind energy is wind energy, obviously. The area that, okay, let's start with how much energy is produced. You're predicting that you can produce 3 gigawatts. I'm assuming that's per hour. Nobody ever says if that's 3 gigawatts per hour off of wind energy. SIRIUS, one module, which Toledo needs 2 of, just for our little bit of sewage, will produce 2.19 gigawatts per year of energy. So, and that's just little bitty Toledo, and that's only our sewage. That does not include Georgia Pacific sewage because they do their own. It doesn't include any of the other plastics or anything else that we could be running through it. The area that's required, if we scale this all down after you know, the call area is big, it's going to get cut down to a smaller area. The measurement is about 270 square miles of ocean. SIRIUS takes up 320 square feet per module. It's going to fit above our sewer treatment plant in Toledo. The 2 modules will fit there. The funding for this, 25 million, and that's, I believe, just to study it. I don't even think that is for building any of it. For SIRIUS, it's $2 million per module, and that's only because these are the first modules. They'll get cheaper as we go on.
Hey, Betty, we're coming up on 4 minutes.
All right, I'll try and go a little faster. Time to produce, you're saying 5 to 10 years, 18 months if we got the money. And we're just waiting. What do we produce? You produce energy. SIRIUS produces energy and distilled water that could be used as a drinking water source. Now, take all of those things and just scale them up for a city like LA or New York. We're talking so many gigawatts of power that this whole thing about talking about wind energy and it's just silly. We also need to consider the impacts. The impact on on the fishing industry is not the only impact. There's a ripple effect. It affects every single one of us in these communities when we don't have money coming in from the fishing industry. They pay people to go out with them. If you pay them a mitigation fee, so you're paying them not to fish, that money does not trickle down to the people that work with them. It does not trickle down to the local economy, and we do not benefit from it. Same thing with the processing plants. If we don't have the processing plants, those people are going to move away from here. That means our schools will suffer, our community will suffer, everything is going to suffer from that impact. You can't just say that this is only gonna affect the fishery or the marine life. It's gonna affect a lot of people all along this coast. And in Toledo, 6 miles in, you can go over to Corvallis and it'll be affecting them because people live there that work here too. So that's my comment. Oh, one last thing before I go. Read your mission statement. Read so Oregon Department of Energy's mission statement. Your mission is to do good for us, not to just willy-nilly do things and then let the chips fall where they may. Unfortunately, we live in a country that does not go by do no harm technology or manufacturing or any of that. We let you do whatever, and then we have to deal with the consequences in the end. So let's turn that around. Let's think before we do something.
Thanks, Betty. Next up is number 5, Ricky Dyson.
Ricky Dyson, D-Y-S-O-N. I don't do fishing. I just eat fish. But I have a background in offshore energy production, in research and development. And I'd like to ask a couple of just sort of technical questions rather than, I agree that that there's some things that have been said here today that really make my back crawl. Somebody said that the time to be negotiating between fisher folk and this offshore system is when the developers start working and they have a plan. Oh yeah. Can you imagine what power fisher folk has when the money's already spent? No, the money's already spent. It's going to happen. And that should be stopped, I think. Yeah. Okay, just a couple of technical questions. One of the things that's a problem with wind energy in general, but particularly on the coast or in the sea, is things like lubrication. Nobody thinks about lubrication. When you get a turbine, you've got a gearbox, right? Those gearboxes are under tremendous pressure, huge blades going around at huge speeds. And those gearboxes have to be lubricated. There's been many cases of those lubrications breaking down and catching fire and burning the whole shebang down. I'd like to see somebody look at those issues also. If we're in coastal waters, particularly here in a place like Oregon, where we have king tides and we have rogue waves that could overwhelm these systems. If you chain it to the the systems to the seafloor, how are you holding that in? A rogue wave, you know, every fisherman here knows that bad things happen at sea. Every fisherman knows that things happen simultaneously when you don't expect them. A rogue wave and a king tide rip those things right out of the ground or sink them. So I just like those couple of technical issues, particularly the lubrication issues. I've done the research on this stuff, and there are still serious issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Number 6 up is Dean Sawyer.
Good morning. My name is Dean Sawyer, S-A-W-Y-E-R. I'm the mayor of Newport, and we'd like to invite you to enjoy our beautiful city. It's the most beautiful city on the West Coast. A lot of the comments that I've heard this morning, I would like to echo, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of those. The city council and I have come up with a letter to you, to BOEM, and I'll get that to you in a minute. The city of Newport recognizes that offshore wind energy could be an important part of our state and nation's clean energy portfolio and help reduce dependency on the fossil fuels. We also greatly value our commercial and recreational fishing fleets for both their economic and cultural contributions to the city, the county, and the state. One thing that I'd like to recommend is a test site. I would like to see BOEM put up 4 or 5 of these on the Oregon coast and see how they react. We had a test here several years ago. Right across the street here, they put up a wind turbine, and it lasted about 2 weeks. The winds just trashed it. We have different winds here than anywhere else California is different than us. The other thing is you will not see wind turbines on the Oregon coast, and the reason is because they won't last. You see them in the Columbia Gorge, which has a different dynamic wind pattern than we do. So I think that I would really like to see that happen. The other thing is, I think it's very important to collaborate with our local fishing industry. You mentioned earlier the pack wave experiment that's going on down about 10 miles from here. That they engaged the fishing community from day one, and it's so far they haven't even finished it yet. And I know you said earlier that it's not economic, it's not commercially viable. We don't know that because it's still in progress of being built. I think that I'd like to see that finished. I'd like to see the data from there, that you take part of that to see if maybe the wave action is better than the turbines. The other thing is turbines are fiberglass, and they last in the environment for thousands of years. And so when they are broken or whatever, we put them in a landfill and they just sit. They don't rot, unfortunately. The other thing, we right over here, if you look out the window, you'll see Aquina Head Lighthouse. That is a bird sanctuary up there. If you go up there, there's thousands of different birds. It's not just seagulls. And I think that you really need to do the environmental assessment for birds as well. I think that's very important. And the other thing is that I'd like to encourage you that if this energy is made off the Oregon coast, that it goes to Oregon ratepayers, because I think that that's, if it all goes to California, that's not the best, not the best way of doing this. But I really would like to encourage you to consider a test site before we put this into full consideration. It's similar to PackWave, but designed with the full floating wind devices. And I'll just end my comments by saying that there are no wind turbines like this in the United States. There's some in Europe, and we just don't know how they're going to react here. And again, I say the wind patterns here are much different. The environment here, the rust and everything is totally different from anywhere else. And I think you need to really take that into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Next up is Mark Cooper, number 7. I just want to say folks are doing a great job being respectful listeners, staying within our time.
Good morning. My name is Mark Cooper, C-O-O-P-E-R. I'm representing the fishing vessel Pacific Inc., fishing vessel Predator, and the fishing vessel Leslie Lee. I'm a commissioner on the Oregon Trawl Commission and board director on MTC. My boats fish for shrimp, crab, whiting, and we do domestic ground fish. I have been involved in the fishing industry for over 60 years. I have 3 trawlers, 2 fish in the mothership whiting fishery. Right now, one of these vessels is fishing in the Brookings Call area, not unusual for this time of year. We spend considerable time in this area because it has good whiting production and low bycatch rates. I would like to comment on the charts that show fishing effort data, in particular, the ones that show whiting mothership catcher vessels effort on page 11. Looking at these charts makes it look like this fleet of boats spends very little time towing. I don't know if this is because whiting catcher boats have a high catch rate compared to non-whiting trawlers and shrimpers, or the years were cherry picked not to review true effort. Whiting catcher boats can catch 150 tons of whiting in a 24-hour period and not tow more than 2 or 3 hours. The ship catcher vessels, let me see. Okay. The chart that the ODF&W has no information from the mothership catcher vessels because they don't collect mothership catcher vessels logbooks because we don't deliver into the Oregon ports. I don't believe tow time shows the true effort of this fleet. Maybe we should be looking at the amount of fish that are caught in the call areas by the fishermen. BOEMS has 2 call areas proposed off of Oregon. Both areas are important to trawlers. BOEM's charge is to get wind energy leases, not to study if they are practical or not. I have several concerns over floating wind energy. When I first saw the call areas, I could see they were productive fishing areas and I didn't want to give them up. Even if you don't fish in these areas, you will have impacts on your fishing business. There are boats that are there and they are going to have to find new grounds, affecting the boats in the new areas. This was my first concern, but what bothers me now is environmental effect that wind generators might have on the California current and updwellings. Our coast is one of 4 places in the world that have such strong updwellings, making them great places for sea life. Wind generators are going to slow the wind up for as many as 45 miles below where the wind farms are located, affecting the updwellings. And this will cause an El Nino effect, which is detrimental to sea productivity. Okay, many people are worried about effects of wind generation on seabirds, whales, and fish. These are studies that show transmission lines. There are studies that show transmission lines have negative effects on brown crabs. We don't know how many of these lines there are going to be, but most likely they are going to be going through crab grounds. Anchoring systems are going to be 6 times longer than the depth of water they're in. A good third going to be chain lying on the bottom, and every time a wave goes by or the wind changes directions, these chains are going to be dragged across the bottom, scouring it clean. My concern is if the program goes through and it fails, who is going to be responsible for cleaning these wind farm anchor gear up that are lost or just left out in the ocean? Offshore wind energy is going to be 6 times as expensive as the cheapest clean energy. So I wonder why BOEMS and the Department of Energy in Oregon think this is a good way to go. I believe we should have environmental studies of these concerns before leases are given out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is number 8, Mike Okanowski.
For the record, can you hear okay in this? For the record, my name's Mike Okanowski. I am a consultant for Pacific Seafood. I'm also on the board member on the West Coast Pelagic
Sorry,
Conservation Group.
Mike, can you spell your last name for the
I'll
reporter?
come over and do it after. Is that okay?
I think she needs it now as a part of the beginning of the record.
Okay. ONIEWSKI. I want that added to my time.
I'm watching.
Okay. Where was I? I have ran plants on the West Coast and Alaska that have done every type of fish there is to do in any major fishery. And I've worked on fisheries policy with the two councils, North Pacific and South, or the Pacific Council, primarily the Pacific, for the last 20 some years. And I presently sit on 3 advisory panels. One of them is the Marine Planning Committee itself, which advises the council on matters of wind energy and also aquaculture. I'm going to read from a coastal pelagic species that's fish like forage fish like sardines, and anchovies is another one. Squid is also considered to be one. The Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel, or CPSAS. I'm just going to read the last half of what we put together, get it in the record. This does not go to BOEM directly. The council generates another report altogether. Virtually all life in the California current ecosystem is dependent on atmospheric wind energy. The CPSAS, our panel, suggests that future comment letters or documents take into account new information related to potential impacts of wind energy to CPS stocks. The CPSAS, our panel, related fisheries are entirely involved in forage fish species. We sustainably harvest CPS species when cautious regulatory safeguards are met. One of these species is Pacific sardine, when in an expansion cycle. When there are high volumes of sardines, they serve as a major food source for species like whales, salmon, and seabirds. This was stated in our report in March on MPC, or marine planning activities. We believe there is a potential danger that the lack of research precludes the collection of sufficient data to determine the degree of alteration caused by wind energy generation installations to important hydrological features such as upwelling, transport, stratification, mixing, and current strength. As cited in our March report, these transport mechanisms make it possible for larval sardine to make it over 60 miles to their inshore nursery zones. This is one specific example of how wind energy could negatively impact a high importance fishery and forage fish. Another open question is what the removal of wind energy for electrical generation would do in an El Nino event. It is logical to assume that when the ocean ecological system is under the stress of an El Nino, that removal of wind energy could amplify that stress. But we have found no studies to verify this. This energy removal could have direct consequence on our fisheries and many mammalian, avian, reptilian, finfish, and shellfish species. We offer 2 quotes for your consideration. These are relatively brief. One is called, and I won't cite where they came from, but I can if anybody wants them. Upwelling jet separation in the California current. Future changes in the intensity and seasonality of wind stress curl field may similarly have a broad influence in the California current system ecosystem, being particularly important to influence the dimensionality of the circulation, which ultimately controls the width of the region under the direct influence of nutrient-rich upwelled waters. Concerning the California current, the effect of floating offshore wind turbines on atmospheric circulation in California. Wind-driven upwelling is responsible for much of the primary productivity that sustains one of the richest ecosystems on the planet. Specific to California, the WFP simulated a 10-kilometer by 10-kilometer wind farm offshore in Bodega Bay. The authors found approximately 10% reduction in wind speeds behind the turbines, with reductions seen up to 100 kilometers downstream. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I was just coming up to say, you're coming up on 5 minutes, but you got it.
With my name.
Number 9, Speaker Craig Cochran. Okay, you're number 9?
I'm number 17, but we switched.
Ah,
That work?
yeah, that's fine. So
Not
that
in
means
trouble?
you're Dean Lou.
What?
It's okay.
You got
You're
it.
Dean. Go for it, Dean.
Okay, am I on? Okay. Hi, I'm Dean Fleck, F-L-E-C-K, and I'm representing England Marine Supply. We are a family-run operation that started in 1944 that my grandfather started. We have 7 stores up and down the West Coast. We have 2 in California, 3 in Oregon, and 2 in Washington. 3 of those stores are now going to be affected because I hear Washington's looking at grounds, and we already have the Humboldt grounds that are being looked at as well. And off of Coos Bay, we have a store there, and that is being affected by this as we speak. So we are a marine supplier that does commercial fishing gear, recreational gear, up and down the coast, and it's a very busy concern. We have over 130 employees, and this, I'm very concerned, will affect how our communities operate. Our business is a very big part of how our communities work. Fishing communities are what I feel our small communities are based on. And I'm very concerned we're going to be losing that with the advent of the wind power coming in. Lost my train of thought there. So the money that comes in on our business and all of our other support businesses that are along with us, it's not just marine suppliers, it's net shops, it's engine manufacturers, it's engine repair guys, it's electronic people. There is grocery stores. All of these things are how our community works and how it goes. In Lincoln County alone, I think it was done a few years ago, the amount of money that was generated in the community, the fishing industry was the highest at 14%. Tourism was at 12%, which is great. We love that. But this is how important the fishing industries are to our local communities coastwide. That number also did not include recreational fishing into that 14% number. So it's pretty big, pretty earth-shattering, shaking for our communities. Another one that I like to state is that the money that comes in from our fisheries which are sustainable and very successful is new money. It comes into the beach and then it circulates in our community 7 times or up to 7 times to all through there. And it really drives our communities and who we are, let alone culturally. I've been brought up in this thing. I'm 60 years old and I've been doing this 41 years. And I can't see our coast not having our fishing communities and how it works. I don't see how wind power would fit in with that. I don't want to see us change. Now, change is good in a lot of ways, and we're not saying no to wind power, but let's do it slower. Let's look at it better and whatnot. One comment today during the question and answer session kind of hit me between the eyes. Heather hit Doug, who I didn't get a chance to hear much from, about, okay, listening and getting all of the areas that you're looking at and whatnot, is that going to change your location of where you put your windmills? Basically, he said no. I heard a little fringe around there. Oh, we could do this or that, but I heard no. I almost said, well, what am I even testifying for? But God dang it, we're going to do it. So anyway, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. So number 10, so Craig, am I skipping you? Oh, they just switched. All right. So well, we want to hear from everybody who wants to say something. So number 10, Dave Wright.
Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Dave Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. I'm here as a public member. I'm on the Oregon Trawl Commission as a public member. I'm fourth generation in the seafood industry. My great-grandfather started in 1910. And when I retired 4 years ago, I was general manager of Pacific Shrimp in Newport, where we employed about 250 people. I was also general manager of Band Pacific in Charleston. We employed approximately 150 people. And I also oversaw the Brookings facility. So I'm well connected in the seafood industry. That being said, when I first came to Newport, I commercially fished. And I fished for about 10 years. Times were different then. Gear was different. The grounds were different. We were fishing for different species. We also had a lot of El Niños at that time. And the conditions were different. So you've got data for the last 20 years. I don't think we've had a strong El Nino since about 98. So those fish have tails and they're going to swim to different parts of the ocean. And that Southern Oregon coast is very important area for the commercial fishing industry. And like Dean just said, that's a lot of jobs on the Oregon coast. And this is just one processor in Newport. I'll just take Newport, where we processed approximately 60 million pounds a year. So when I'm here today, I'm here as a consumer. I do not want to see the people in Oregon, the citizens of Oregon and the United States deprived of some of the best seafood protein on the planet. Also, the products from just this Newport facility went around the world, all over the world. And it wasn't just one species, it was many. So that being said, I can only say that I can look back at history and some of it kind of repeats. I remember when they were putting dams in the Columbia River, not me personally, but my grandfather and dad talking about it, where we almost didn't have fish ladders for the salmon to make their runs. And they didn't put a fish ladder in the Grand Coulee. And so what happened? 20 to 40 years later, no more salmon. Those species became extinct. So my recommendation is if you're going to do this, get the environmental, get your information together, get it figured out, go outside 700 fathoms, create your fish ladder, like the seafood industry was very adamant about when the fish were going up the Columbia River for dams when they put them in, and leave that area. There's no reason that I can see to where you can't go outside 700 fathoms. As you say, it's steep. It's not going to be that much farther. Sure, technology is going to have to get better. It's going to have to get better anyway. So my recommendation is let's create a fish ladder and get outside 700 fathoms. Let these Oregon coasts thrive and keep the family businesses, everything that's good about this industry. And let's continue with creating the citizens of the United States and around the world, the protein, the best fish available on the planet. And so I'm speaking for the for the citizens of the United States and the world, that we need to feed the world, and it's no better place than here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Number 11 is Kelsey.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Kelsey Smith, and I didn't write anything out. I'm just going to wing this. So I am a second generation commercial fisherman. I'm a former fisherman. Now I'm a fisherman's wife, and I am here to represent our future. And when I heard that these wind farms were going to go up, I was like, no way they can do this. They're going to come into our ocean that is functioning and working just fine, and people are thriving off what this ocean is providing, and throw a big infrastructure and that's smack dab in the middle of this. You're messing with an ecosystem, you're messing with an economy, you're messing with a protein that goes to the world. Like, I don't even see how it's logically sound to even have that thought when the carbon footprint of creating these infrastructures is far greater than the energy that they're going to produce. Why not take that lump sum of money that, from a presentation that I watched, that this offshore wind is actually one of the most expensive energies that is that renewable energy. Why not take that lump sum of money and do solar power that can actually be used alongside of agriculture and can be used in open areas on land? These, sorry, I'm shaking. This infrastructure is going to, one, create the carbon footprint that is just massive, just to get a few gigawatts of energy, when there's other options to be explored. Because if this takes place, you're ruining the lives of millions and ruining a food source for the world. So thanks.
Thanks, Kelsey. Deep breath. Number 12, Jolene Lambert.
Hi, my name is Jolene Lambert. I'm a fisherman for over 10 years. I've seen so many wonderful things out there that can be destroyed by these turbines. So I realize you believe that you're doing great things, but I beg to differ with you. This will drastically alter the ocean life. To say that it will be any less than that, the ocean, what? Oh, the ocean layman, to say this to a layman, also knows, and known as the fisherman, it will affect them, who bring sustainable food to their communities. We're going to be affected. That is underrated. Mitigation will be very underrated. So consider the ripple effects from the fishermen to the trucking, to the stores, to the table and the homes. Our lifestyle will be changed or decreased. It's already overrated by NOAA. And sanctuaries So on the land is much more accessible to build things, build turbines, infrastructure, be able to fix them, and it's much faster than the ever-changing energy synergy of the ocean. It's a lot more costly than any other kind of energy source that are on the land. And there's no way around that. It said our tax money will be used for this. Where's that money that we pay taxes for? Could be used in much better ways. Solar power is already powerful and could produce the same amount of power. Now, I know the blades of the turbines can alter navigation and for the vessels. And the crabs become confused, oh, not mesmerized by the by the electrical magnetic energy that comes from the underwater cables. And that affects our the crabs' eating behavior. We need them to eat and grow before we catch them. And we're already over regulated by other things. So please consider to stay off the ocean. Stay on the land. It's a lot safer all the way around. No way around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene. And thank you, Linda. Number 13, Kelly. Hi, Kelly. And Kelly, be sure to spell your last name.
I can do that. Turn it on though.
Yeah. No, we don't.
It's a long name. So I'm Kelly Rutherford, Retherford. I am representing 40+ years in the commercial fishing industry with a family of 21. So in these 40+ years, we have managed to gather 4 fishing vessels, and we are 3 generation. So I have right now, at this point, I have 3 sons on the ocean and a grandson. So as I speak, these vessels are part of the West Coast Ground Trawl survey, and the other 3 are part of a sustainable fishery, or sustainable fisheries, excuse me, which include shrimp and groundfish, hake, or whiting, crab. So we've got all the fisheries covered between the 4 boats and the time on the water. As I began, I wanted to recognize the public comment instructions on the big screen, as all along, and also along with the handout that states, BOEM does not consider anonymous comments, but helpful comments that are fact-based and include link to data or research. So here's my fact-based information. Fact number 1, from data given to BOEM on behalf of research, sports, commercial, on the call areas in Coos Bay and Brookings, the information was not used prior to the call area because it wasn't gathered prior to the call area that considers the fisheries. I know we gathered here today to consider the fisheries in this process, but we're a little late coming to the table. And with that being said, I believe that the data that was provided by FRAM, NOAA, NIMS, National Fisheries, and the individuals that have already provided information, us as individual fishermen and fishing families cannot color in the blanks of that box enough to get consideration from, as Doug said, there will be basically no consideration for removing or changing the call area along our coast. So what's the purpose of adding more lines to the oral map? And with that stated, I would like to, and that's a fact because Doug stated it. So as I stand here before you, like I said, 40 years of experience says, the truth is I've lived it and watched it. We are not just, like I said, 4 boats on the water. We're not just boats on the water. We're families, big families. We are families. When you go out and you drive these coastlines, you won't just see a boat there catching fish. It's not just provisions for the world. It is families that provide provision for the world. And our fisheries and our seafoods go worldwide. And so as I say that, I just want to make sure that as we present ourselves here today, that this wasn't a mistake even coming just because the decisions have already been made. We too should have a part in this. And we too ask that BOEM would slow down this process, reconsider the lines that were put in those boxes by BOEM are not all accurate and they are not complete. And we should not suffer the consequences. Someday, hopefully I don't have to explain to my grandbabies or my great grandbabies why we don't fish anymore, because the fields that we worked as families for all these years, 40 plus years, as I stated, these farms, these families, these fisheries, somebody came along and took them out from under our hands. We have preserved, protected, and been a part of those fisheries. And it isn't just about the fish that gets brought in, it's about our land. That land belongs to this room, to our community, to these fishing families. It belongs to you guys. It belongs to all of us, but we should all have a part in it. And it's being ripped out from under us. We've been given from April 28th to June 29th to protect 40 plus years. That is unfair. BOEM should be called out on it. And like I said, when I stand before you this day, I want you to know that these years were not in vain, and I will fight till I can fight no more. And I just ask that BOEM will consider maybe a different option. I'm not saying no wind farms. I'm saying get them out of my fishing grounds and my family's fishing grounds. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. And thanks for listening. I'm really sorry that you guys have to hear it for everybody. So I really appreciate your willingness to look us in the eye and sit before us. Thank you.
Kelly, thank you. I just want to do a time check. It's noon and we've got 1, 2, 3 more folks in the room to speak and two people online to sign up. So we're going to go past noon and just wanted to just make sure y'all knew that. So number 14 is Kurt Cochran. I hesitate on people's last names, so be sure to spell it.
Hello, I probably should be quiet, but name's Kurt Cochran, C-O-C-H-R-A-N. I was gonna write something out, but as I came here today and saw it, it's meaningless. I'm sorry. You guys have made up your mind. I think it was Doug, the head guy here. He's already checked out, not paying attention to the meeting. I know this is on record. But you guys aren't taking this serious. You really have just washed this away. And that's all I get out of this meeting today. As I've sat back there and listened, it's very disappointing. I'm a second of 3 generations. My son-in-law right now is fishing 40 miles below the California border, getting the bags of hay and bring them up and delivering in this call area. But you guys got yellow and not low production. Mark Cooper hit it right that it's not the VMS track, it's how much CPU or how much is coming out of that area, what importance. But the other thing is in these areas, if you're fishing is important to you on that given day, on that given year, on that given time, it's not over a period of time. There's so many things that regulate us of what we can go, whether it's incidental catch of something, staying out of this area because it's close to moving there. Weather conditions. I mean, nobody thought we'd be seeing southerlies in Newport in June like we are right now. We haven't seen summer yet. Have had northwest updwellings. Every year changes. Some of these marks in the whiting fishery offshore, those were important because that's where we were. We were dark blotch or black cod or some other species shut us out and moved us there. So we use this whole area and to put areas there this hurt. I was just shrimp fishing here last week down here in the northern part of this gull area and you don't show much for shrimp. Same thing. We don't know our oceans and what's out there, but my boat that's fishing whiting out there has live video on it, and he's out there in 300, 400, 500 fathoms. Sees a little school of feed like this at 80 fathoms. As the net's going down and going through, he stops and looks at it on the live feed. It's shrimp. He's just outside me. I'm on the inside edge here fishing, and what you guys have a box here. It says there's not much action. There is, because the shrimp's even farther west this year. We haven't had the dwelling. We haven't had the northwest to put it up on the bank. But every fishery that you go through here, you're not talking to fishermen. You're talking to NIMS, you're talking to agencies, you're talking to VMS. You're not talking to the fishermen and where they're actually fishing and what they've seen over the years. You're missing that component. This is supposed to get it here today. It's not going to get it. You need to be in around on a round table with fishermen and understand really what the impact of all fisheries are. You've done a good job of this pretty much pissing everybody off. Even the rec guys, if you go back here to tuna fishing, you got it right where the little guys want to go sport fish tuna. So you've done a good job of getting all of us, not this one user group. So I'll give you that. We do fish crabs and everything else. Oregon's unique because they do, I gotta admit, back their fishermen. If you look at the fisheries management right now, Oregon is the only place that they got rid of the RCA and moved it to give fishermen access to the resources. And that's important. I appreciate that and about that. So if you really want to put wind energy, as far as I'm concerned, put it in California. I mean, they don't back their fishermen and they don't care, and that's fine. But Oregon does, and we do have our grounds are important to everybody, and you've heard from the processors community and some of the workforce. So, and if I'm going to draw on your map or your wind plot, there isn't going to be a box on it. I mean, it's going to be zero. Nothing in Oregon. And I think Oregon can slow down. I really do. We don't have to be the front. We can come 10, 20, 30, 40 years behind everybody until the technology is there to put it outside 700 fathoms, even though I still think that is a problem, but that's kind of our stopping line for a lot of our fisheries. It doesn't have to be the front runner. So you can put it down the road and see what technology does and see if something happens. Let everybody else be the guinea pig, because the resource, the families, the communities, and benefit to the nation and our fisheries is more important than one or two sites. And I was going to ask another comment, but it wasn't on the record. Why did you pick those two? Why didn't you pick up off Cascade Head or someplace else? Why you picked the two that are really important? Because you're pulling data from the people that it doesn't mean the most to. And yeah, the fishermen. So Mr. Representative Gomberg did make a comment, and I will agree with him. If you do something in Oregon and hurt us, Oregon should benefit from it, not California. So that south area in Brookings down there, that would be even a bigger mistake to stick wind farms in our backyard and shove the power somewhere else. And the gentleman on the deal can answer it. So thank you very much. And thank you for coming.
Thanks, Kurt. Becky, number 15.
I am Becky Wagner, legal name Rebecca, so I don't know if you need that, but Wagner, W-A-G-N-E-R. I am here representing Newport Fisherman Wives. Newport Fisherman Wives is a nonprofit corporation consisting of wives, mothers, daughters, friends, and community members, with a common goal supporting the industry and the people who deliver sustainable, high-quality seafood, the safety of our fishing community, their families, and the United States Coast Guard. Unlike people who are outside of the industry, we have a clear vision of what the commercial fishing is. Very simple. It is about families feeding families. The majority of fishing vessels are actually small, independently owned businesses that often run by multi-generational fishing families who engage in dangerous, demanding work that brings seafood to shore. In return, the seafood industry provides a livelihood to fishing crews, to people who work in processing, and those in supporting countless trades and businesses that support commercial fishing. In addition to feeding families, fishing feeds our coastal economies in Oregon and beyond. Newport Fisherman Wives are deeply committed to the safety, productivity, longevity of our fleets and the waters they fish. And we have grave reservations about the proposed wind farms off Oregon's central and southern shore. There are countless questions and concerns about how the placement of floating wind turbines would impact the prime fishing grounds and our ocean ecosystem. There are far too many unknowns, and with a flawed permitting plan that puts environmental and economic assessments at the end of the process, it is unlikely we will get any of these answered in a timely manner, or if at all. Our organization is known for its passion, commitment to protecting the lives of fishermen. If the wind turbines are placed in the proposed areas, how will it impact the safety of our fishing crews? There are unanswered questions about the impacts on navigational radar, but it is well documented that radar responds to metal. Will the U.S. Coast Guard search and rescue crews be able to find a boat in distress? If there are hundreds of metal obstructions that may interfere with the radar capabilities? And how is the timelessness of emergency response impacted when 200 turbines stand between the crew in crisis and the U.S. Coast Guard? When time is of the essence and hypothermia sets in within minutes. And then when weather or ocean conditions demand a speedy return to the shore, what happens when captains have to navigate out of their way to avoid a floating wind farm? BOEM cannot answer these questions that we have little faith that the energy interests that develop these sites I don't know where it went. We find it that they can do. We find it extremely unsettling that there are currently no floating offshore wind farms operating in the United States. How can BOEM make any assurances that this technology is completely untried here, considering the Pacific Ocean harsh conditions? It's a roll of the dice. We know all too well the dangers represented by the Pacific and the wrath of our winter storms. We are not willing to see our family members put in harm's way by BOEM pursuit of a high stakes experiment. We are not willing to see fishing grounds lost and with them the livelihoods that come to support generations of Oregon fishing families. Our communities are not willing to trade a productive, sustainable economic driver on the hope of something that might work or might not. Newport Fisherman Wives urges BOEM and the Oregon Department of Energy and the Oregon governor and legislations to declare a moratorium on floating wind farms off the Oregon coast until extensive research and testing can be done to understand the risks and impacts that will result from displacing a successful industry, a valuable protein source, and countless industry support businesses in pursuit of the one that is dangerously unknown. On a personal thought, just one second. You all at BOEM are not with us when we get the call. When a vessel goes down and there is a crew in distress, these are living souls on a boat. You are not the one that has to write a check to the family members, whether they're survivors or not survivors. You are not the one that drives up and down the coast to go to the funerals, to the men and women that fish, that risk their lives to provide seafood to America and beyond. We are in the depths, and the safety of our fishing fleet and our Coast Guard is utmost important to us. Thank you.
Becky, thank you. I believe it's Michelle, number 16.
My name is Michelle Longo, Eder. My last name is spelled E-D-E-R. And my husband is Bob Eder. We have the fishing vessel Timmy Boy. You're gonna have to give me a little extra time.
Just deep breath, it's all right.
Because Becky's Wagner's testimony on behalf of Newport Fishermen's Wives is very moving and very personal to all of us in this room. My husband would be here today, but he's in front of the Lincoln County Commissioners making a presentation, asking them to join in a resolution relative to the proposed offshore wind sites. He serves as a commissioner on the Oregon Dungeness Crab Commission, and I represent our interests at the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and serve on a ground fish advisory panel for 2 terms, representing fixed gear. We have a 60-foot steel boat, fishing vessel Timmy Boy. Our primary fisheries are for Dungeness crab and for black cod using fixed gear, mainly traps. We also fish for shrimp. We have fished from San Francisco to Cordova, Alaska, but primarily over the last 20 years, we have primarily fished the Oregon coast. As fishermen, we are strong believers in the fact climate change is real. We definitely need alternative energy sources that are not based on fossil fuels. My husband, Bob, is one of the people who worked tirelessly with Oregon State University and communities and fishermen along the coast to collaboratively identify a site for the wave energy project that is now beginning to be deployed. It was a long process. It was 10 years. But when we talk about collaboration, and that is an example that we believe BOEM should follow, this is fishermen in the room with the proponents of a site where they put charts up on the wall, and the fishermen talked and showed what areas were essential to the fishing industry and what areas they could collaborate on in order to promote research. And that is the model that as Oregonians, as fishermen, that we are accustomed to and believe in and promote when we're talking about multiple uses of the ocean by both the public and the private sectors. Although we're based in Newport, we fish both black cod and crab in the call areas as presently described. The call areas are directly in conflict with our fishing grounds. We fish in 100 to 700 fathoms. And that's the same as hundreds of other fishermen along this coast. With offshore wind, if you close off certain areas to fishing, you compress effort into other areas and create conflict and loss of opportunity. The closer these floating windmills are to shore, the worse the impact is on fisheries. There were two quotes I heard from members of the panel today, and I was in the back of the room, so I can't specifically identify who said them. But one man said, relative to the lease process, we hope the lessees will collaborate. And he was referring to that once the leases were granted by BOEM, that BOEM hopes that these, and I believe foreign-owned, but companies will collaborate with fishermen. Hope, maybe collaborate. Not in any world that I know of are fishermen going to be heard by companies that have expended millions and millions of dollars already. That's just not going to happen. And for BOEM to say, we hope lessees will collaborate. Instead, BOEM should require and actively participate involving fishermen in those sites up front. And instead, lessees should be required to collaborate with fishermen. The other quote I heard that scared me was a question that came from the audience about safety. And what I heard someone on this panel say, they skirted the question and they said, well, you know, safety is up to the Coast Guard. That was shameful. How could you proceed ahead allowing companies to install offshore wind without a complete understanding of whether or not there could be an interference in communication between vessels at sea, the Coast Guard, in search and rescue? How could you possibly allow these vessels, these leases, and these companies to install offshore wind platforms where vessels will have to make decisions in navigation because of weather conditions and because certain areas are now off limits, that vessels will have to make decisions that are less safe than they would have, but for the offshore wind installations? That's just wrong.
Hey, Michelle, you're coming up on 6.5 minutes.
Thank you. There's been discussion about, you know, companies paying mitigation, financial. I don't know what it could possibly be, compensation to vessels that each business, some of these businesses have payrolls that exceed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars annually to this economy here in Newport. And that's not just 1 or 2 or 3 vessels. That's a lot. But more important than the income that is generated, also as important is the culture that we represent. You've heard from multi-generational families today. Our culture is valuable to us. And by moving forward with offshore wind sites, you are striking at our family's cultures, which is essential to our society. 2 things I want you to remember. If you're going to proceed, there must be test devices and not proceeding ahead with multiple leases, but a test site and a test site that is outside of 1,300 meters. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Right, we have one more speaker in the room who signed up, number 18, John Moody. And then we're going to shift to, we have 3 people online. So then we'll go ahead and move to our online public comment. So come on up. Remember to state your name and affiliation and spell your last name.
Okay. Michelle's going to be a tough one to follow, but my name is John Moody, Moody. I'm the general manager for Pacific Seafood Newport. I've been in the industry 30 plus years. We process between 80 and 100 million pounds a year. We currently have 350 team members. 150 of those team members live in the area. They have kids in school, they own houses, they shop locally and contribute to the communities. We process whiting, pink shrimp, salmon, squid, dozens of bottom fish species, crab, tuna, and halibut. We're a year-round facility, and yeah, we do a lot of fish. I do not support the offshore wind energy due to the risks and the risks of financial impacts to our communities, financial impacts to our fishing industry, unknown environmental impacts to the ocean, and also safety to all vessels traveling through the call areas. I believe we should look at more of a land-based solar wind energy solutions. There's a lack of trust in this room with BOEM. And I really, really hope that everybody from BOEM is listening to the good people. So that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, Ariella, can you tell me who is first with our virtual public comment? So Chris Rutherford, if you could go ahead and state your name, affiliation, and spell your last name. And it looks like, are they unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you very clearly, Chris.
You can. How do I turn my video on here?
How does he do what?
Turn video.
Turn the video on. It should be at the bottom. There should be a little video camera that you just click. Some of your family's wondering if they want to see your face. There you are. All right, Chris, we can see you, but you're still muted.
What about now?
We can see you and hear you. So go ahead.
Okay, good.
Yep, go ahead and say your name again and spell your last name, and then we'll.
Okay.
And you've got 3 to 5 minutes.
I got 10 minutes. That sounds great.
No,
yes.
Michelle had 10 minutes. You only get 3 to 5 minutes.
I am Chris Rutherford, RETHERFORD. I'm out fishing right now. I'm actually in the cruise site right now. As you can see.
Hey, Chris, we lost you. There he is.
There you go.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm out here fishing pink shrimp. I do not support this at all, any way, shape, or form. I feel that there are too many risks involved. Earlier, I asked a question on the environmental impact on the West Coast from these, and I was told basically to look at a website. There's no test sites. There's no data There's nothing here on the West Coast or in Oregon. That's fact. There's nothing here that they can get the data from. So what's going on the East Coast with the turbines and what the upwellings are doing over there? That's going to be different here. Completely different ocean. So we can't speculate that it's going to be the same. This ecosystem is so fragile, and I don't want to be told by BOEM that we're going to be okay. I want to be shown. I want to be, I feel it's fair that, yeah, you want to put a test site in, put a test site in. Show us that we're going to be okay. Until that happens, I'm 100% against it. There's too much. This Oregon coast it's one of the most beautiful places. It's what this ocean gives us is amazing, fruitful, and to have people come in that are sitting in the office and say, "Oh yeah, studies show this," without actually studying this water, the water that I'm fishing right now. It's wrong. Do your studies and then come back and talk to us. I feel that's the only way to get us our support. Show that it's not going to have effect on my children's children, the communities that we deliver our product to, the United States that we deliver millions of pounds of fish to. This is not good, and I feel like there hasn't been enough time, and you guys need to sit back and reconsider. Give some more options. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, next up is Mike Conroy.
Yeah, confirming you can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. We can see you.
Wonderful. I apologize for the latter. My name is Mike Conroy, C-O-N-R-O-Y. I'm calling today on behalf of the American Albacore Fishing Association. We are not opposed to renewable energy sources. What we are opposed to is being told where offshore wind will be sited rather than being asked where it could go. Are there areas offshore which could be workable for most? Probably, but those discussions haven't happened. Using history as a guide, wind energy areas will be identified within the call areas. The opportunity to collaborate on siting does not appear to align with the BOEM process. We should not allow expediency to be the enemy of knowledge. Rushing to permit 30 gigawatts of offshore wind projects by 2030 without understanding all of the environmental, ecological, social, and economic costs and benefits, many of which other commenters have brought to this meeting, is irresponsible. Hydroelectric dams were once thought to be the answer. Now we're removing dams due to environmental, ecological, and social concerns and harms. The Oral Wind Map tool, as far as I can tell, does a good job of providing some data on certain fisheries. I stand by comments made earlier about standardizing timeframes so there can be more of an apples to apples comparison between fisheries. Specifically with regard to albacore fishing data, while there is information on commercial and charter vessel effort, there is nothing from the recreational component of that fishery. And while not pertinent at this time, it bears noting that development within the call areas could impact vessel safety as they will be required to go around wind farms due to radar impacts and other likely concerns. I do want to piggyback on Representative Gomberg's comment with regard to the proximity of the Brookings call area to the California-Oregon border, but present kind of a different concern. That call area is roughly 50 miles from the northern tip of the Humboldt wind energy area. My question would be, at what stage will BOEM even consider the cumulative impacts to the fishing industry and dependent communities? In particularly, the MSC certified groundfish and HMS fisheries in the communities which utilize and depend upon both of those areas. I believe it was Heather who asked about whale entanglement with anchor lines, cables, inter-array cables, etc. What if whales aren't entangled in this infrastructure, but the migratory patterns of those marine mammals are altered due to electromagnetic fields, noise, etc., such that there are increased interactions or an increased risk of interaction with Dungeness crab and other fixed-gear fisheries? I will close by saying it is rare that the fishing industry and environmental groups share a common view. Offshore wind and the rush to get steel on the water is creating interesting alliances. Protecting our highly regulated and sustainably sourced seafood, which is an integral part to Oregon's, the region's, and the nation's food security, should not be jeopardized in favor of rushing unproven floating technology with unknown impacts promoted by foreign parent companies. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Last person we have to sign up is Dan Waldeck. So Dan, if you want to go ahead and unmute and.
Yes, thank you. I see the mic working there. So again, Dan Waldeck, WALDECK, Executive Director of the Pacific Whiting Conservation Cooperative. The Whiting Co-op will be submitting formal comments prior to the June 28th deadline. And so I really just have maybe some statistics to share to sort of shed some additional light on comments you've heard from fishermen, and then just some concise closing thoughts, I guess. You've heard from several whiting fishermen talk about the importance of these two call areas, and data that I have available to me and that BOEM has available to them from their partner agency, National Fisheries Service, would show you that of the coastline that the whiting fishery operates off Oregon and Washington, which is, I think, about 440 miles of coastline, over the last 20 years, 25% of the mothership and catcher processor sector hauls have come from the Brookings and Coos Bay call areas. These are important areas to the whiting fishery, to the Dungeness crab fishery, the pink shrimp fishery, the bottom trawl fishery, albacore fisheries, recreational fisheries, salmon fisheries. The data that you have in ORWIN map is inadequate and needs to be fixed. You've heard from conservationists, government officials, community leaders, fishermen, fishing families, processors. You've heard from them today. You've heard from them the last several months as this process has unfolded. What we heard from BOEM today, though, is that you don't know the economic impacts from fishery displacement, nor the downstream effects on coastal communities. You don't know the environmental impacts to fish stocks, protected resources, or the California current ecosystem. BOEM doesn't know how critical fisheries research will be disrupted or lost. BOEM doesn't know how offshore wind arrays will affect safety and life at sea. BOEM doesn't know where the power will go, nor what it will cost consumers. And under all of that uncertainty, BOEM has not said that they will slow down to provide time to collect the necessary data and to analyze these impacts. It appears the process will move forward solely under BOEM's discretion. What concerns all of us is that BOEM is not mandated to avoid and minimize these impacts, nor are they required to truly account for them. They simply have to consider them, to think about them. And I think as many folks in the room, if not all the folks in the room, our expectation is that those considerations will dismiss those concerns. And I'll close by just saying, given the enormity of what is at stake here, economically, environmentally, traditionally, it's not enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. That is everybody who has signed up for public comment. We're at about 20 minutes before 1. Whitney, was there anything you wanted to say in closing? And then Heather, anything you wanted to say in closing? Who decides the locations of the turbines? Is that your question? Whitney?
So if I understand the question correctly, is who decides the location of the turbines? But I want to in terms of the discussion today is the location of the call areas. So for the location of the call areas, that's by BOEM, correct? And the leases would be issued by BOEM, and the construction operations plan would undergo technical environmental review. And that, in that plan would be the location of each individual wind turbine generator. And that again is an approval or not approved by BOEM.
So that's how the decisions are made. So Whitney,
Not, NOAA is responsible for the ocean's health, not BOEM. So shouldn't NOAA be ultimately responsible?
So BOEM is a federal agency, and NOAA is also under the Department of Commerce. So BOEM has to consult with NOAA, and we do consult with other federal partners in this. But BOEM's mission is energy and mineral resources. So we issue leases to provide access on the OCS. And I can't speak on behalf of NOAA's mission, but there's certainly a partner in understanding data and information and consultation with respect to the review within our process.
They're very good at eliminating fishermen. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. So eliminating fishermen are endangered.
Jolene, thank you for your comment. So I think this ends our time together, but Whitney, is there anything you wanted to say before we hear from Heather?
Sure. I just want to say thank you all for coming today and providing your comment and listening. We're also listening. We're hearing you. Look forward to having these comments up on the record and to view and for BOEM analysis. I think to address Heather's comments and how we provide that response to what we've heard. So again, the public comment period, if you weren't able to say what you wanted and want to provide it in writing, it's until June 28th. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to the Midwater Trawlers Cooperative and Oregon Trawl Commission for their willingness to have this dialogue today.
Yeah, I would just say a lot of really excellent comments were made today. I want to thank everybody online and in the room. Everybody's busy. A lot of people are out fishing, but everybody realizes what an important issue that this is. I think that there's more to be done. And if you do want to provide a written comment, you're encouraged to do that. You can comment more than once to the Federal Register on this issue. And I would challenge you all to talk with your family, your neighbors, others in the industry who haven't been involved to talk about this issue and share their concerns by the 28th. I also want to thank our elected officials that have chimed in. This is an ongoing process where every day it seems there's new people, new municipalities from Astoria, Warrenton, all the way down to Brookings that are making their voices heard. And so I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here. And thanks BOEM for coming and listening, and Jamie for the facilitation.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone. You could have a good rest of your day.